Thompson Foundation is what we call clearinghouse. It acts as a middle between NGOs and government. But Korean law firm governance is a bit different. That each law firm has to have its own organization that access to markets. And my foundation is such.
It's coming. It's all right.
You guys are so
Thank you so
many people working behind the scenes.
So is the representative from Turkey here today? I'll just put you in touch with her. We met yesterday, yeah. Nice to see you again.
So she'll do that.
Oh, sure. After we finish this.
For the lawyers being involved, what is the work that you so I can get a sense of who's there.
So where are you sitting? Oh, find you.
Or what do you do? You just meet up in this for the lawyers beyond borders.
You don't need pictures, right?
She needs pictures and
Ah, there's the picture right there.
Video and I'm laughing. Sorry.
That was very quick.
Wow.
That was impressive.
It was quick.
That was
It was really quick. And it's my dear friend. There's four panelists.
Good afternoon. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, may I call the meeting to order. I'm sure that you have enjoyed your lunch, and in a relaxed mood you can join the session. The chair requested me to continue the afternoon session because she thought that I was having too much of a fun. So, so here I am. So we'll continue with the agenda item 3C, smuggling of migrants, trafficking in persons, and the contemporary forms of slavery, issues of appropriate identification, protection, and assistance to migrants and trafficking victims. As you have seen from the morning sessions, there will also be a panel discussions in the afternoon, followed by an interactive session directly with the delegates. And I'm sure that you would have a lot of questions to ask to the distinguished panelists. The panel Meanwhile, let me remind you that if you want to make a statement, please register your name so that we can appropriately allocate slot and time for you to make statements. I now have the pleasure of inviting Her Excellency Ms. Cho Ban Ing, Secretary of State of the Ministry of Interior and the Permanent Vice Chair of the National Committee on Counter-Trafficking in Person in Cambodia. Madam, you have the panel.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. And right now, I just would like to introduce you about the interactive roundtable this afternoon on the smuggling, on migration, trafficking in person, and contemporary forms of slavery, and issue of appropriate identification and protection and assistance to migrant and trafficking victims. I am from Cambodia, and I just would like to share about something we have done in Cambodia that we form as the National Committee for Counter-Trafficking, and we divide into 6 working groups. Firstly is on the prevention, secondly on the protection, third on the law enforcement, the fourth is on the justice, the fifth is on the international cooperation, and the sixth is on the migration. So all the 6 working group is multidisciplinary group and responds to all type or kind of trafficking in person. And the objective of this interaction roundtable discussion, there are 2. First is to identify the major issue related to trafficking in person and smuggling in Asia and the Pacific region, as well as seek innovative approach to strengthen prevention, investigation, prosecution, protection, and operational cooperation, and right-based approach to ensure migration in safe, orderly, and regular. Second objective is to share good practices and identify key areas for actionable commitment, including legal and policy responses, programmatic interventions, as well as regional cooperation, including on increased protection to migrant and victim and trafficking. The roundtable discussion will take 50 minutes, and after the panelists express their key interest, we will open the floor to the panel, and you can prepare for the question, and it depends on the time we have. Let me summarize the key component, of the roundtable discussion. As we all aware, that in the Asia and the Pacific, migrant smuggling and trafficking in person inflict significant or the far-reaching harm. This activity enrich criminals, threaten the rules of law, and undermine public support and enlightenment and humanitarian migration policy. The exploitation associated with this activity exact a particularly heavy toll on vulnerable individuals and community. Safe and supported migration bring great benefit to individual as well as to the national economic of state of origin and destination. Migrant smuggling and human trafficking undermine this benefit, and thus it is critical that steps be taken to minimize the vulnerability of migrants to abuse and exploitation at the hand of profiteers, including traffickers and smugglers. This includes building on strong legal protection for the individuals and assistance for victims on trafficking, as well as the needs for policy responses and international cooperation that are formed by evidence and experience. Right now we have 4 panelists and 3 subjects. And first, I would like to introduce Ms. Vicky Mo, National Manager for the Migration Support Program at the Australian Red Cross and co-chair of the Asia Pacific Migration Network, APMN, our Red Cross and Red Crescent National Society, to speak on experiences on the addressing the vulnerability of migrant and victim assistance. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Madam Moderator. And firstly, thank you for this opportunity to sit on this very distinguished panel. And it's my pleasure to speak on behalf of Australian Red Cross, as you heard, but also as co-chair of the Asia Pacific Migration Network and on behalf of Federation here today. The Global Compact on Migration, as we've heard many times already, provides an important opportunity to solidify agreements on a few basic principles built on decades of work across the international community to assist people affected or vulnerable to trafficking, forced labour, or other forms of exploitation. As a first principle, when it comes to confronting trafficking, we should set out as our primary goal to protect and support those at risk. Their well-being is the measure of our success, not the reduction of migration rates or the number of traffickers incarcerated. How do we achieve this? Well, let me offer a few examples. Nepal Red Cross, for example, works with civil society organisations, providing direct humanitarian assistance to persons who have experienced trafficking and exploitation. This includes the provision of legal support, livelihood and income generation support, temporary shelter and psychosocial assistance, as well as sensitisation activities for local stakeholders on risks and vulnerabilities of migrants to human trafficking and exploitation. In Australia, Australian Red Cross operates programs in partnership with the Australian Government, where people who have experienced trafficking are provided with accommodation, financial support, access to health and other humanitarian services, and a caseworker to help them feel safe and secure, and to provide assistance that addresses their unique vulnerabilities. We offer information to support their understanding of their choices and their options, while providing enough time and support to decide what steps they next wish to take. However, offering such services is worth little if the people we seek to help are too afraid to reach out to us. We know from our direct experience across the region that many victims are too scared, too isolated, and too fearful of threatened consequences of reaching out for help. Supporting victims of trafficking means guaranteeing safe channels to access basic services, safe channels to report abuses, irrespective of legal status. In particular, we call on states to guarantee that vulnerable migrants have safe and confidential access to such support, with no obligation for service providers or migrants themselves to disclose their legal status. As a second principle, we must have our eyes fully open to the signs that trafficking is taking place. All along any migration trail, officials and organisations must be actively monitoring potential indicators of trafficking. States should also ensure that any person who has experienced trafficking or is at risk of exploitation is safely identified and referred appropriately to humanitarian support and assistance. And for this, we all need to understand the indicators of trafficking. Within the Red Cross, Red Crescent National Societies, we often work with IOM to understand training on trafficking indicators and how to safely identify and refer persons affected by who are experiencing exploitation. And this capacity building is critical for civil society. Additionally, authorities need to understand that the very particular vulnerabilities of people at risk or subject to trafficking, beyond law enforcement, is around careful indicator training. We need to be increasingly engaged in capacity building around trafficking indicators in particular. So in Australia, for example, we deliver training on indicators of trafficking to government agencies, and often in partnership with government, the people who might come into contact first with people who are experiencing trafficking, for example, police and immigration officials. We also need to train frontline staff in indicators of trafficking, including doctors, including unions and employers. And we also need to make sure people know where to go for support. Most importantly, all of this training has to include information about the vulnerabilities of those who have been trafficked, why they may not speak up, why they might be nervous with authorities or any form of police, and why they are often not immediately visible. A third principle should be acting early and acting together. To effectively reduce risks to trafficking and exploitation, it is critical that we raise the awareness and reduce vulnerabilities before they occur. A significant number of national societies worldwide, including Bangladesh, Nepal, Pakistan, as we've already heard from the governments here today, organise pre-departure briefings, sometimes in coordination with recruitment agencies, for example. They provide first aid training, and in the case of somewhere like the Philippines, provide a hotline for information for people both in country and who have left for work-related opportunities. Many national societies also provide reintegration support, and critically, support for families, especially for children who are often left behind. Partnership is likewise critical to the provision of assistance. With the Rights of Migrants in Action program, the Federation are supporting 43 civil societies across the world in 15 countries and are daily delivering direct assistance and legal protection to victims of human trafficking. These activities range, as I've already said, from shelter, legal and psychological support to vocational training, reintegration, training for law enforcement, and advocacy and awareness raising about the vulnerabilities of migrants. Additionally, partnerships across regions are key, whether it is cross-border engagements concerned with the vulnerabilities of people in the region, or an ongoing dialogue with countries of destination, such as existing dialogues with Gulf states or Europe. A linked-up approach in terms of humanitarian support and understanding is critical. In particular, it's also important that we recognise unaccompanied and separated children as amongst the most vulnerable to trafficking and exploitation. It's crucial that the best interests of the child, and particularly those needs of separated children, are the primary consideration in all mainstream responses and programs, and that appropriate safeguards and protection mechanisms are in place to keep children safe wherever they are. And most importantly, we must work with those who have lived experience of trafficking to understand these drivers, how to protect the most vulnerable, and how we can assist those who have experienced trafficking. And with that, I just wish to close with some comments from people who have experienced trafficking and who have received the humanitarian support they need. I was scared talking to the police, not knowing if I would be believed. My experiences with my work were horrible. You wouldn't believe. I had no hope, but with support, I got my hope back. I felt strong to leave my work and knew I had somewhere to go. I felt protected, and I feel less scared now. I came to trust people again. I came to trust myself, and I am not afraid to go out and see the world. I am no longer a victim.
Thank you so much, Ms. Vicky Mo, to highlight on the preventive activity toward the vulnerable society and support the rehabilitation of victims of trafficking and more focus on the children and women. And now I just would like to invite the second panelist, Mr. Takun Lee, attorney, Don Chon Foundation, the Republic of Korea, to speak on the experience, good practices, and perspective on the protection and our assistance for the victim of trafficking and vulnerable migrant. Please.
Thank you, Your Excellency, for the kind introduction, and thank you, Vicky, for the wonderful talk. Hearing the Australian experience, especially in regards to victim assistance, it seems like Korea still has a long way to go. Good afternoon. My name is Takun. I'm an attorney working at Dongcheon Foundation in Korea. Dongcheon is a pro bono foundation founded by a Korean law firm called BKL. And we focus on many areas of interest, but we also extensively participate in legal advocacy, in migrant issues, both in our own capacity and also in collaboration with the BKL. One of the specific area of interest for us has been human trafficking, especially in regards to migrant victims of the so-called entertainment visas. So I'd like to talk a bit about on the lessons we've learned from our experiences in representing the victims. Many migrant women who enter Korea under the entertainment visa do so under the expectation that they would be performing as entertainment performers or workers, but in reality are often subject to sexual abuse and forced prostitution. In helping these victims, first problem we encounter is that prosecution of the perpetrators are often very difficult. While Republic of Korea has amended its criminal act to mostly incorporate the definition and the scope of human trafficking as defined in the Palermo Protocol, application of this new provision seldom happens, both by the prosecutors when charging the crimes and also by the court when finding whether the crime has taken place. With the help of a local NGO called Durebang, we've recently conducted a preliminary analysis of all known court cases involving entertainment visas. Here are our findings. We've discovered that law enforcement, as well as the court, usually takes a very narrow view in determining whether a crime of human trafficking has actually taken place and does not fully take into account the specific circumstances of the victims of human trafficking. To look at specific examples, in many cases, in finding the defendants, the shop owners, in which the victims have been forced to prostitution, not guilty, in finding the defendants not guilty, the court cited conflicting testimonies of other women who are still working under the perpetrator, thereby still under his or her influence. And also, the court cited relative freedom of movement of the victims, not taking into consideration the fact that, to give a few examples, the fact that the passports of the victims have been confiscated by the shop owners, or that the shop owners have made threats to the victims that if she tries to leave the store, he will bring the mafias to hunt her down. And finally, courts sometimes even question the motive of the victims in reporting the crime, questioning whether this was done to extend her stay, or length of stay in Korea. So we believe that having the crime of human trafficking included in hard law by itself may be insufficient, and that a more active and hands-on training of relevant government officials will be necessary. This would allow them to achieve a better understanding and awareness of the definition and scope of human trafficking, thereby leading to a more successful identification of the victim and the prosecution of the crimes. In this regard, we have appreciated that our National Human Rights Commission has published the Sex Trafficking Victim Identification Guidelines and has updated last year and recommended relevant government bodies, including the police, to refer to the guidelines. Thank you. The guidelines wholly incorporates the internationally accepted definition of human trafficking, giving specific examples of act, means, and exploitative purpose in the Korean context to help government officials in establishing the victim as a victim of human trafficking. The guidelines also list specific actions that the government officials need to take to protect the victims, including providing them with shelters, not subjecting to deportation process, etc. While this recommendation from the National Human Rights Commission by itself is not per se binding upon the government bodies, we appreciate the direction that the Korean government is taking and hope this develops into something of a promising practice that we can point to in the future. Another issue that we have discovered in representing the victims is the right to stay for the victims, which goes to protection, the second P of the three Ps. Often we find that without a concrete migrant status granted for the victims, they are often forced to weigh the risk of unemployment and deportation against the prospect of continued forced prostitution. in Korea, migrant victims of forced prostitution are in principle exempted from deportation. And we also appreciate the fact that our Ministry of Justice in 2013 has amended its decree and regulations to exempt the reporting obligations of police officers when they're dealing with undocumented migrants who are victims of crimes. But nevertheless, we are still witnessing several cases where victims of human trafficking who come under entertainment visas are rounded up in a routine sweep of the shops and then promptly deported to their countries of origin on the grounds of illegal prostitution. And even if these victims are allowed to stay, it's often difficult for the victims to obtain work permits, thereby having no means of living. We believe that these barriers act as a significant dissuading factor for the victims in reporting the crimes and taking further actions. The experiences we've gained in regards to human trafficking has led to our input on the Korean civil society organization recommendations on GCM, including, among others, recommendation to introduce a comprehensive victim protection system to identify and protect victims of human trafficking by, for example, providing them with grant of migrant status. And we hope that these recommendations will eventually find themselves included in the normative framework. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Tagondi. And we learn a lot, from the prosecution on the trafficking in person. It's not quite easy, and it depends on the commitment of the lawyer and also the prosecutor or based on the law. And talking about the Bali process experiences of the regional practical cooperation to address the challenges of smuggling of migrants and trafficking in persons and its joint contribution to GCM. We have two panelists. First is the, both of them are the co-chairs of the Bali process. And first is the first panelist is from the government of Australia, His Excellency Andrew Goletszinowski, Ambassador and People Smuggling and Human Trafficking Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. Please, the floor is yours. Oh, he's first? Because of the rank. So we change. Firstly, we just invite the panelists from the government of the Republic of Indonesia. Mr. Ari Aprianto, Deputy Director, Minister of the Foreign Affairs, to speak on this topic. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. I don't think I should give more introduction on the Bali process. The ambassador has talked about Bali process yesterday. And most of the countries that are represented here are also members of Bali process, as well as some of the international organizations. In any case, everything about Bali process is already on the net. But Madam Moderator, referring to the topic of our discussion this afternoon, I would like to speak about some of the latest achievements of the Bali process with respect to the combating human trafficking and people smuggling and the transnational organized crime in the region. The first thing that I would like to share to the meeting is regarding the first government and business forum meeting. It was convened in Perth, Australia in August this year. It was aiming at building common purpose and also common approach by government and private sector to combat exploitation, extortion, which underlines the incidence of forced labor as well as modern slavery. We are engaging with the private sector on the assumption that certainly Bali process is a means of engagement and we understand that private sector is a key stakeholder on this particular matter. The outcome of the first Government of Business Forum is a work plan. This work plan is developed by private sector. It is private sector-led. The government has nothing to do with that. Prioritizing on 3 key important matters. The first is on the ethical recruitment, and the second on the transparency in supply chain, and the third regarding the safeguard and redress mechanism. So the private sector will have 1 year until 2018. They will report the implementation of the work plan on the Bali process meeting and also on to the second Government and Business Forum in Indonesia next year. And the second one I would like to share is on the working group on trafficking in person. This working group is co-chaired by Indonesia and Australia. It aims at sharing best practices, information, also to identify possible regional and global cooperation. This working group has developed several policy guidelines on the protection of victims of human trafficking, on the identifying victims of human trafficking, criminalizing the perpetrators, and the latest one is on the following the money, which will help law enforcement agencies to do some further investigation and also to dismantle syndicate of human trafficking. And the other thing is that I would like to share here is the working group on the disruption of syndicate of human trafficking. This is co-chaired by Malaysia and New Zealand. This working group has been in operation since 2015. This working group aims at sharing information. This is information, practical information, including intelligence information on the present and the activities of the syndicate of human trafficking. And the result of these working groups since its inception in 2015 is quite remarkable. Up until now, the working group has been able to assist 65 victims of human trafficking. It also developed 12 search warrants and apprehension of more than 80 suspects. And it's also convened regular training for police officers, immigration, as well as border control officers. I think that would be all that I can share with you at this moment. Madam, the rest would be explained by the ambassador.
So right now, I think that it's the, I would like to invite His Excellency Andrew Golet-Jinowski, Ambassador of the People Smuggling and Human Trafficking Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, to add, some information regarding to the Bali process, please.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. Thank you, Pak Ari, for briefing the room on the Bali process. It's not accidental that we sit here together, because that really is it's the spirit in which the Bali process is managed. It's very much a joint effort by Australia and Indonesia, and very much something which is very much a collective and cooperative enterprise by most of the countries here in this room. I'd like to build on some of the things that Pak Ari briefed us on, and link it also to, of course, the process of the Global Compact, which we're here to discuss. The first one is the difficult problem of people smuggling. That's very much one of the key preoccupations of the Bali process, and I think we've been successful in that. I want to reflect also on the discussion that happened in Vienna at the 5th thematic session preparing for the Global Compact, where people smuggling was again the subject of a panel. And it was a very interesting panel. There was lively discussion. The panelists wanted to put the view to the room that people smuggling is actually a very complex problem. In many cases, people smugglers are community members themselves, and often they're helping their own community and offering protection and facilitating migrants to go to the place where they would like to go to. This was a view that was, I think, robustly discussed in the room. And certainly some of the delegations in this room made the point that, at least in our region, people smugglers tend to be organized criminal networks, and they have very little to commend them to us as agents of useful facilitation. I guess that the key point about people smuggling is not just that it is a strong indicator of the danger of trafficking, and it often brings people into serious danger. The real point is that people say that without people smugglers, how will migrants get to where they need to work? Well, our view is that the opposite is the truth, that without the people smugglers, the countries that receive migrant workers will still need the migrant workers, but they will need to facilitate their arrival through regular means. That is the difference. So instead of coming in irregularly, they will have to come in regularly, they will be paid well, and they'll be protected. So if our aim in this forum is to promote safe, orderly, and regular migration, which is our mandate, then the way to do that is actually by preventing the irregular movement of people, which actually allows exploitation to take place. That's the first point on people smuggling, which I think isn't really often enough discussed. The second point is about trafficking. And again, this is an area where I think the Bali process is very much focused. We have two working groups that have done a great deal of work successfully, as Pak Ari has outlined. There again, the preparatory session for this conference, for the Global Compact on Migration that happened in Vienna, was a very full discussion, panel discussion, which I had the privilege of co-moderating, on trafficking. But it was really just on trafficking. We had some very experienced trafficking experts who talked about the application of the Palermo protocols and the importance of increasing the rate of prosecution, which is very important. But I'd like to contrast that with the experience of the Bali process and the panel that we heard from this morning here in this room under agenda item 3A, I think it was. There we heard about other strategies. For example, we heard about protection of migrant workers, in particular the ethical recruitment of migrant workers, and the importance of making sure that as migrant workers move from one country through transit to the country of destination, that there are proper means, legal means in place to ensure that they are not exploited. That wasn't really discussed in Vienna, but it's something that we're very concerned about in this region, and it's something that the IOM, we know, is very much focused on. Secondly, we heard this morning about supply chain transparency measures, and that there are a number of pieces of legislation around the world now, modern slavery acts, which will allow greater supply chain transparency. Again, to minimize the risk of exploitation of workers, including migrant workers. And that's something that the ILO is very much focused on. And very importantly, we heard this morning about the need to engage with the private sector, which again was a little bit absent in our Vienna consultations, but what we heard this morning, I think, is that while governments are doing their best, the private sector is steaming ahead in organizing itself to try and make sure that it doesn't exploit workers incidentally as they're trying to do business. And the Bali process, as Pak Ari explained, is in the forefront of trying to ensure that businesses, progressive businesses and progressive governments in our region work together to create the enabling environment where we can jointly ensure that the right sort of regulations are in place to prevent these terrible abuses from taking place. So all of that is really interesting. I mean, there's the sort of the old approach, which is just the prosecutorial approach, and then there's all this innovative thinking which is happening. And it's really good that our region is actually at the forefront of a lot of this thinking and a lot of this best practice. And I really hope that some of this is captured in the final document that we're trying to develop collectively for the Global Compact. I mentioned a few agencies, and there's others that I didn't mention that are equally involved in different pieces of this puzzle. But that's another frustration that hopefully the final document of the co-facilitators can also address. The fact that we have in the world at the moment a global strategy to combat trafficking and a global strategy to combat modern slavery and a strategy on forced labour, and next week there's a conference on child labour. But none of these strategies actually talk to each other very well. They are not integrated, and the agencies that, who have individual mandates are not terribly well integrated at all. And when I speak to the individual agencies, they admit as much. It's a fraught problem, and it's a problem that the member states actually have to own and address. And I think the Global Compact on Migration is another opportunity to bring about better coherence amongst these different programs. Ultimately, we should be able to talk about a single global strategy to deal with all these problems, because they're essentially one problem. They're not 4 or 5 different problems. They're one problem with different aspects. And that's something which I think is very important. And that brings me, Madam Chair, to my last point, and that is when we talk about coherence between agencies, between regional organizations, between member states, that's what will be most important once we have a global compact on migration. What is the coherent mechanism for delivering that global compact? How will we implement the things that we have agreed? That's something that we haven't really yet discussed as a regional community or an international community. And that will be, I think, at least as critical as what the text looks like. And the two possibilities are you give this to a single agency with the very strict mandate that they must coordinate other agencies to deliver the outcomes, or you divide the Global Compact amongst the different agencies. I think the first approach is preferable to the second from our perspective. That's Australia's perspective, but it's still something that we haven't discussed. And I think that's possibly the next important issue that we as member states need to consider. And I'd be very interested personally to hear from any participant who might wish to express a view on that. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Yeah, thank you so much, our panelists. And right now, I just would like to invite the panel, to have the floor, and you can ask a question. And firstly, we just open for 3 questions, and if we have time, we just run to another round. So please. Okay, please, sir. I cannot see the flag. Yes. Yeah, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I take the floor because I don't have the official board. My name is Rafendi Jamin. At this time, I'm representing ASEA Dialogue on Forced Migrations Secretariat. I'd like to thank, because it's the first time I take my floor, I'd like to thank the organizer of inviting the dialogue to this very important meeting. Joining the panels, I'd like to introduce about the dialogue first. The dialogue, which was commenced in 2015, is convened by core partners from Australia, Center for the Policy Development from Indonesia, Indonesian Institute of Sciences, from Thailand, Institute of Human Rights and Peace Studies, Mahidol. We have Sri Papa as a speaker this morning. In Malaysia, Institute of Strategic International Studies. It's designed to reflect the unique characteristic of the migration governance environment in Southeast Asia and Pacific. It brings together government officials, academic and non-academic, including senior ex-government, experts from the key countries, and representative of international organizations, including IOM and UNHCR, as well as the non-government organization, with the aim of putting forward practical and achievable new policy ideas for use by government. The dialogue's agenda includes regional architecture on preparedness for displacement, improving multilateral governance of migration in the region, strengthening the implementation of ASEAN Convention on Trafficking in Person, exploring unique opportunity for business to work with governments on countering trafficking and slavery, developing a positive regional agenda for the Global Compact on Migrations and Refugees, climate change displacement, refugee employment pathway, children's detention, and repatriation and integration of forced migrants. The dialogue has achieved considerable initial success. For example, it has contributed to 2 major initiatives adopted by 2016 Bali process, ministerial meeting, and assisted the Bali process in drawing lessons from the 2015 Andaman Sea crisis. It has stimulated the development of Bali process rapid response mechanisms for the displacement and gain an acceptance as an ongoing track 2 or 1.5 dialogue for the Bali process, and advise ASEAN on the implementation of the Convention on Trafficking in Person. The dialogue has been carefully constructed to work effectively within the regional environment, to be the outcomes focused, and to ensure that the right people are in the right room, working in an atmosphere of trust and mutual cooperation. Its characteristics are helpful precedents for organizations elsewhere seeking to engage better across boundaries and with governments to achieve better migration solution. A creative use of similar track 2 or track 1.5 process will be necessary if the Global Compact on Migration embraces the importance of regionalisms and mini multilateralisms to achieving these aims. So we are really looking forward and endorsing what Pak Ari from Indonesia has already said on the process of engagement of business in the context of migrations. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you so much for the comment, and I think that the Secretary will take note. And secondly, I just would like to invite the sir, from the ICRC. So please, you're on.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Thank you for all panelists for very interesting points raised. Now we heard about the concerns of migrants who have been trafficked, and I'd say trafficked migrants may be among those who lose contact with their families or who are prevented from establishing such contact. And they may also be among those who lose their lives. Now, the families of disappeared or missing migrants may face challenges all of their own. They are left without answers. They can face administrative hurdles, psychosocial, psychological, and economic difficulties, and among others. Now, I would like to hear from the panelists suggestions as to what measures states may include to, or may include, yes, to address these concerns of missing migrants in the Global Compact, and also what measures they could take, among others, to prevent migrants from going missing in the first place, to facilitate the search and identification of migrants, and to address the specific needs of families of missing migrants. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And now just Thailand representative, please.
Thank you for all panelists for your thoughts, provoking presentation. This question is addressed to all panelists. In Thailand, one of the main problems with regards to employment opportunity of the victim of trafficking is the stigmatization attached to victim of trafficking. My question is, how and what can the government as well as the private sector do to change this sentiment? And how do we encourage more business to employ victims of trafficking? And how can the GCM address this issue? Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And I just would like to invite one more from ILO, please.
Thanks a lot, Maria Paavilainen from ILO. Thank you for the very interesting panel and the interesting discussions earlier today and yesterday. I would just like to very much support the important point raised by Ambassador Andrew Koletsinovsky about the interrelated nature of the problems relating to trafficking, exploitation of migrant workers, and forced labor. Essentially, as he said, these are the same problem. And for the information of this meeting, I would just like to share one more piece in the puzzle of the international legal framework, namely the ILO Protocol of 2014, supplementing the Forced Labor Convention. Many important issues have been discussed here today in this session relating to identification of victims of trafficking, victim protection and support, and these are measures that have been outlined in the Forced Labor Protocol. There is also this section on prevention, which I feel is very, very important for the Global Compact on Migration. It, for example, looks at issues such as extending labor law protection to those sectors of employment where workers are vulnerable, and improving labor inspection measures. And to go back to the discussion in the morning, domestic work, for example, is an excellent example of a sector where this type of measures would really make a difference. Our estimate on slavery and forced labor issued this year found that actually 24% of all forced labor victims are in domestic work. So this is an area, a sector where we can clearly see that absence of proper labor law protection, absence of enforcement compliance mechanism makes migrant workers very vulnerable to forced labor. So I just wanted to share this for the information of the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing. And our panelists would like to add or clarify something? Okay, please.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. I'll just respond to a couple of those. ICRC, the tragic issue of missing migrants. Frankly, I think the chance of locating irregular migrants that are missing is very small. It's a very difficult problem. It's one that I don't think our systems are really up to handling. The answer is actually regular migration. Regular migrants, there is a package of protections around them which will enable, first of all, makes it unlikely that they'll become missing, and if they do happen to fall into mischance, then it's much easier to locate them. So the answer to the question of missing migrants is to regularize labor migration around the region. That is the way to handle that problem. ILO, thank you very much for your points, and thank you in particular for reminding us of the global estimate on forced labor and modern slavery, which was released at the United Nations General Assembly just this year. It was a historic document which has taken 2 years to finalize. It actually, although I said that there's fragmentation amongst the agencies, this is an example of coordination amongst agencies. I think it involved interviewing some 79,000 people across 52 countries over 2 years. I mean, it really is a serious effort to collect data and ensure that when we talk about these problems, we talk about them in a way which makes sense to ordinary people. We don't throw different terms at them and confuse them and have different definitions. So I think that is a very important step forward. And thank you very much for the statement about the Asian dialogue on forced migration. It is another important element to the fabric of our discussions in this region. And in fact, the ADFM has already played a very significant role in terms of how we cooperate amongst ourselves. Thank you.
Are there any more questions? Please, Jajuan APA, please.
Thank you. Just wanted to briefly come back to yesterday's discussion around human rights and the importance of data, and to really follow on from the colleague from ILO and also from His Excellency the Ambassador from Australia. And that's in talking about trafficking. In the United Nations family, under the rubric of the UNAIDS joint program on HIV, we've done a lot of work on conflating and trying to separate the conflation of trafficking and sex work. And it's a major problem because it depends on what our response has been. I think that the discussion and the innovation of moving away from prosecutory type of approaches is to be applauded. And I really very much like the discussion around the consensus building in the Bali process. In all of our work that we've been doing on not conflating consensual adult sex work with trafficking, it does come back as an honourable member from Korea talked about the Palermo Protocol, and it's actually extremely important that we follow the Palermo Protocol correctly and all three conditions of it that equal trafficking. And that does not happen in very many national discourses. As we move to looking at new legislation around trafficking, we have to be extremely careful that we in fact do not put women who are selling sex and further victimize them, further make their lives subject to even more human rights abuses in terms of mislabeling, because that labeling actually matters an enormous amount. Further, the approach that we in the United Nations have been taking to sex work has been very much looking at a labour rights perspective, looking at a human rights perspective, and looking at agency. Because within this whole discussion, we really should be talking about the agency of human beings and moving away from lexicon of victims to the lexicon that actually looks at the empowerment of people. But just to reiterate, I think in the Global Compact, we must be extremely careful that as we move forward to address human trafficking, we do not conflate it with consensual adult sex work. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. And now the UNICEF, please.
Thank you very much. And thank you for all the valuable comments and insights shared earlier by the panelists and by speakers and commentators on the importance of taking a more comprehensive and preventive and victim-centered approach to the issue of migration, smuggling and trafficking in this context. I just want to draw attention to one specific issue that often gets overlooked and where I feel that the Global Compact on Migration can actually provide a global blueprint that could also then be adapted regionally here. And that is the importance of child protection systems. When we are talking about the people and the authorities that actually need to do what we have now been discussing, the prevention, the identification, the screening, the interviewing, the assistance, the protection, the assistance, all the way to actually reintegration and finding a durable solution. It is social workers, it is child protection authorities, it is that interplay between law enforcement, the justice sector, the child protection sector. And very often in an approach that is where the lead stays with migration authorities or where the lead stays with the justice sector, the actual needs of child victims in particular get overlooked. So I think it's very important that we find a way to also, as we look for solutions to prevent, as we look for solutions to respond, and as we look for the best way forward to provide adequate assistance and support, that we do not forget that the key is strong national child protection systems and strong and robust cross-border mechanisms, agreements, modalities to cooperate across border. And I think the Global Compact in particular can highlight and support this by identifying the need for this cross-border continuum of care and protection and address a critical gap where children in particular keep to be fall through.
Okay, thank you so much. And right now we just invite Sri Lanka and then IOM and close.
Thank you, panelists, for your very valuable and very informative presentations. Sri Lanka is a country of origin as far as labor migration is concerned. And we have the biggest challenge in separating labor violations with that of human trafficking. Because in the countries of employment, the offense or the incident takes place in the country of employment. So we often find the jurisdiction in the prosecution process. How are we going to file action against a trafficker in another country? Knowingly or unknowingly, the worker is a regular migrant, all registered, all documented workers. But once they are in employment, they are being transferred without their consent to another destination. So this is where we sort of have a big problem in prosecutions. So I would wish to invite the expertise from Asian labor sending countries to find a way out to prosecute the traffickers in the country of employment. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. If we talk about the prosecution, I think that sometimes, you know, the sending country itself cannot solve the problem only because the crime occurs at the destination country. So until we have the collaboration. And are there any clarification on the prosecution process or something? No? You would like to share something or not? No. Please, yeah, please say.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. We at the Bali process certainly understand the complexity of situations surrounding the case of human trafficking. We understand that failure to appreciate this complexity will not only lead to the further violation of the rights of the victim, but also the inability of the law enforcement agencies to investigate and to prosecute this man or the syndicate. As I have mentioned before, we have established policy guidelines on identifying, protecting victims of human trafficking, and also on the investigating the syndicate of the human trafficking. And these policy guidelines compiling best practices in the region. And to coming back to what the representative of the RCRC has mentioned before, these policy guidelines contain several practical approach on how identifying and protecting the rights of the victim. For example, it encourages law enforcement agencies to use their sense, considering the situation on the field to differentiate whether a certain person is the victims or the perpetrators. And then it also coming up with other protection of rights, such as confidentiality of the identity of the victims, and then also delivering urgent needs of the victim, including the physical and mental treatment, and also finding out the identity, locating the family, and trying to establish contact between the victim, if the victim can be establish the citizenship, guaranteeing access of consular protection between the victim and the embassy or the consulate of the victims. And yeah, I think that will be all at this moment. Thank you, moderator.
Thank you so much. And last is IOM. Oh, you please.
So can I just quickly add to that? What Ari said is correct. We're not really moving away from a prosecutorial approach. A huge part of what the Bali process does is prosecution and training of judges and lawyers, and the Regional Support Office of the Bali process does a lot of that. But we're never going to prosecute our way out of this problem. We know now that the number of victims in the world are 40.3 million at a very conservative estimate, most of whom live in the Asia-Pacific region. The number of prosecutions in our region will probably never reach beyond the low thousands. So we need to find more innovative strategies. So when we talk about supply chain transparency, ethical recruitment practices for migrant workers, etc., that is complementary, I think, to the prosecution work. And in terms of the difficulty of prosecuting people in a second country or a third country, that is amongst the most difficult challenges. Again, prevention is the most important thing. But you'd be interested to know, I think, that the UN University, together with the Permanent Mission of Liechtenstein in New York, has been doing some work precisely on how that can be done. And within the Bali process, one of the working groups under the Bali process Government and Business Forum is precisely tasked to look at grievance and redress mechanisms, which by definition will have to be cross-border. So there is some work being done, but I'm afraid you've identified one of the most difficult problems.
Okay, so last is the IOM around. So please your turn.
Thank you very much, and thanks to the panelists for an interesting collection of views. I'd like to raise maybe 2 points and add a question there. First of all, it was interesting to hear a little bit about what Korea is doing to incentivize victims to participate, particularly as regards to regularization of stay and possibilities to remain and that kind of thing. I'm wondering if there are other ideas. We certainly see a massive difference between the number of victims that are estimated to be in the world and the number that are actually being identified. And I do wonder whether there are sufficient incentives available for victims to actually want to complain, identify themselves, perhaps not as victims of trafficking, but to identify their situations as being exploitative. It seems to me that certainly from the criminal justice side of things, we've tried to do a fair bit to remove some of the kind of the naked intimidation that often occurs in a court process. Victims are often able to testify via closed circuit camera or behind screens and that kind of thing. But is that really an incentive to be involved in the process? And I guess my sub-point is, are we doing enough with civil remedies to make those available to victims of trafficking? Because certainly one would think that a balance of probabilities standard, which is designed specifically to essentially compensate for loss, is something that would be directly in the best interests of that person and that would be easily recognizable, as opposed to the criminal justice process, which tends to be a little bit, have a much higher standard of proof and be more difficult to conclude, and is not always going to result in compensatory damages for the victim. So that was maybe part of my question. The second point I wanted to raise was just a note, really, that we don't forget about the extreme difficulty of long-term reintegration for victims of trafficking. Most victims of trafficking who cross international borders do return home following their experience of exploitation. There are many organizations represented here and elsewhere who are involved in the process of reintegrating or assisting victims to achieve some level of self-sufficiency following an exploitative experience. I did want to mention, though, that many victims of trafficking also hold considerable debt when they return home, and very few organizations are actually focused or even, I would even hesitate to say, we're not even collecting the data related to the debt being held by victims of trafficking to informal actors in their home countries. But this is, I was wondering whether there are any good practices or experiences or thoughts in relation to either of these points. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and I'm so sorry because the time is limited. And in conclude, I just would like to say that we all recognize that smuggling and trafficking in person are very complicated crime, because during the investigation we found that there are a lot of offense combined during the migration, and sometimes the victim themselves is scared and don't dare to show themselves as a victim because they afraid of the illegal entry or illegal work at the destination country as well. And that is why we need to work carefully to identify each case. And from the floor, I would like to say that the most effective ways to enhance safe, orderly, and regular migration should focus on the preventive measure and cannot meet until they are become victim, because we will have a lot of problem to solve, and it seems like sometimes it's too late. Yeah, because they pass away already or handicapped already. So it's very difficult to solve the problem. It does mean that to mobilize all stakeholders to involve both government, civil society, private sector, to make more responsibility in taking part to respond migrant smuggling and trafficking in person, as well as to raise awareness to people in country, in the region, and over the world to aware the issue and also its impact. And also in order to prevent and to protect themselves from the crime. And secondly, we should enhance more the capacity building program to law enforcers and social workers in identifying victims and support victims properly, and to investigate and send them to the court, send the offender to the court, and prosecute them by promoting mutual legal assistance between relevant countries in order to push forward safe, orderly, regular migration with better management and real benefit for migrants. So thank you so much for the panel, and thank so much for panelists and the sharing of the ideas or comments from the floor. Thank you so much. And the panel tend to end. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Chu Ban Eng, for moderating a very interesting session. And also, thanks to the panelists for your insightful statements and very good discussions with the delegates. With this, we move on to the floor once again for statement from the delegates. We have 4 requests: Papua New Guinea, Philippines Commission on Filipinos Overseas, Commission on Human Rights, again from Philippines, and the Global Alliance Against Trafficking in Women. So I hope that no one else will raise flag at the stage. So may I request the distinguished delegate from Papua New Guinea to make the statement, and may I request that if you could limit the statement within 3 minutes, and we can finish it quickly so that we can go into the next most interesting topic within the Global Compact that I know. So over to you. Papua New Guinea.
Chair, thank you very much. Thank you for giving us the opportunity to speak on this relevant topic. Chair, Excellencies, and distinguished guests, Papua New Guinea joins members of this forum to acknowledge the increasing problem of smuggling of migrants, trafficking of persons, and other contemporary forms of slavery in the region. We all know that, Chair, that perpetrators prey on vulnerable situation of the victims, and they do that to gain profit at the expense of the welfare and lives of the latter. I would like to remind us all, Chair, at this juncture that trafficking does not only occur cross-border, it does also occur within the borders, within our respective jurisdictions. Papua New Guinea also acknowledges the ongoing challenges countries in the region face in combating these hideous crimes. We, however, recognize the progress and achievements made by individual countries through the hard work of the law enforcement agencies and through policy and legislative reforms taken at the national level, or collectively in various sub-regional and regional avenues. Chair, we do not need any more anecdotal evidence to prove the prevalence of globally of migrant smuggling, trafficking of persons, and other forms of modern-day slavery. What we require now, Chair, is a global response. The Global Compact for Safe, Orderly, and Regular Migration is a step in the right direction. Chair, Papua New Guinea remains committed to regional and global efforts in combating any forms of inhuman treatment of migrants. Due to our geographical position in the region, the bridge between Asia and the Pacific. Papua New Guinea is a transit country for some migrants, but it is a destination country for others. Chair, in recognition of the progress made at sub-regional, regional, and globally in addressing the many issues related to migration, Papua New Guinea has taken steps at the national level to carry out legislative and policy reforms, which are not only aimed at facilitating regular migration, but also to combat irregular migration. And particularly, this is aimed at combating human smuggling and trafficking of persons and related transnational crimes. Papua New Guinea government, Chair, has taken a holistic approach in this area by criminalizing the acts of people smuggling and trafficking in persons, which is necessitated by legislative amendment to the criminal code. The same law also has provisions which provide protection for victims of trafficking. Subsequently, Chair, a National Human Trafficking Committee was established, whose aim is to strengthen the country's response by promoting cooperative efforts, information sharing amongst the partners concerned, which includes private sector. This initiative, Chair, has culminated in the development of a human trafficking National Action Plan 2015 to 2020, and it's accompanying the standard operating procedures. And on this note, Chair, I would like to acknowledge IOM through its country office in Port Moresby. They are doing a tremendous job in assisting us to coordinate these efforts. Chair, the SOPs I referred to earlier contain clear and precise guidelines on victim identification, referral procedures and protection mechanisms under the Papua New Guinea law and in very close consultation with relevant international conventions. A wide awareness was carried out following legislative and policy reforms, and citizens, including law enforcement officials, were made aware or informed into the issues of human smuggling and trafficking persons and taught on how to respond appropriately. Chair, at the regional and sub-regional level, we maintain our commitment to the broader objectives of the Bali process, and that is to combat people smuggling, trafficking of persons, and related transnational crimes. Of particular note, Chair, and I refer to the co-chairs, both Australia and Indonesia, mentioned earlier on about the Bali process government and business forum, which was held in Perth, Australia, a few months back. During that forum, ministers made a pledge to work together with private sectors to eliminate any forms of modern-day slavery in the supply chains. Papua New Guinea also, Chair, actively involved in the work of the Pacific Immigration Directors Conference, and a detailed presentation made yesterday by the representative. But we participate through other member countries in sharing of information. We learn new skills and techniques and develop policies and programs aimed at enhancing our regional approach to the varied issues of migration. Chair, Excellencies, and delegates, in conclusion, I reaffirm my government's commitment to the New York Declaration for Refugees and Migrants and this relevant agenda, Global Compact for Safe, Orderly, and Regular Migration. We will support any efforts to global migration governance, including promoting orderly and regular migration to protect the rights of migrants, especially those who fall victims to transnational organized crimes. It is our view, Chair, that we must create more legal pathways to manage regular migration and irregular migration alike, to support migrants and regular migrants and irregular migrants, whilst at the same time, where it is appropriately so, we should make allowance to states to exercise their prerogative to return irregular migrants who do not seek special protection under relevant international convention. Thank you, Chair, Excellencies, and delegates.
Thank you very much. May I now request Commission on Filipinos Overseas to take the floor, and could you kindly make the statement within at least 3 minutes? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As we all know, trafficking and smuggling are globally prevalent, distinct but related crimes defined in international law. And while the notion of contemporary forms of slavery is not technically defined in international law, it is linked to a variety of human rights violations, and more importantly, to trafficking in persons and smuggling of migrants. As such, the Trafficking in Persons Protocol and the Smuggling of Migrants Protocol, along with several other international and regional frameworks and related instruments, are relevant to building comprehensive responses to trafficking and smuggling of migrants. As co-chair of the experts group on return and reintegration, the Philippines is active in discussions on the consequences of people smuggling, trafficking in persons, and related transnational crime in the Bali process. Also, the Philippines is the 6th member state to ratify the ASEAN Convention Against Trafficking in Persons, especially women and children, or the ACTIP, which entered into force last March. We do recognize that sustained implementation of these frameworks require the dedication of resources and a more comprehensive response to adequately prevent trafficking, reduce the reliance of smuggling, and protect the rights of migrants. Mr. Chair, the Philippines is identified as a source country and to a lesser extent a destination and transit country for trafficked men, women, and children. Nonetheless, the Philippines is making great strides in addressing trafficking and smuggling. Instrumental to this achievement is the Interagency Council Against Trafficking of the Philippines, or the ESCAP. It is composed of key agencies of government, non-government organizations representing migrants, the women, and children. The Council is mandated to eliminate trafficking in persons in the Philippines, prevent the occurrence of trafficking, and provide assistance to victims and convict offenders. The Philippines also amended its anti-trafficking in persons law to keep pace with the new and evolving acts of trafficking, to further protect victims and survivors of trafficking, and to strengthen the institutions and resources aimed at anti-trafficking efforts. The Philippine government also increased funding allocation to intensify its anti-trafficking prevention campaigns, provide further training for frontline actors, and operate a 24/7 national hotline where victims or their families can get immediate support. Mr. Chair, in line with this regional preparatory meeting and the subsequent stock-taking and negotiations for the GCM, the Philippines hosted several multi-stakeholder discussions to gather doable and implementable recommendations and commitments that states should consider, adhere to, and highlight in the GCN. And please allow me to mention a few. These are organized under the 4P framework of prevention, protection, prosecution, and partnerships. Under prevention, expand the scope of regular pathways to migration by, among others, decreasing the cost of regular channels, such as reducing visa application and medical examination fees. Maximize the use of technology for information dissemination, countering and reporting trafficking and smuggling cases. Under protection, consider regularization and the right to residency of victims as option other than return. ensure availability, accessibility, affordability, and quality of health and other services to survivors and victims of trafficking and smuggling, including debriefing and psychosocial support. Establish firewalls between immigration, the justice system, and social and health service providers, and provide incentives to encourage victims to come forward and prosecute cases. Under prosecution, ensure the non-criminalization of migrants who are victims of smuggling and trafficking, which only exacerbate their vulnerabilities. And on partnerships, implement the principle of shared responsibility of countries of origin and destination in the rehabilitation of victims of human trafficking and smuggling. Encourage sharing of disaggregated data among states on migrant smuggling and trafficking to facilitate assistance to victims and prosecution of smugglers, as well as to inform and enhance policies. And to promote and support cooperation with the civil society and local governments in the protection and prevention efforts. Mr. Chair, a more exhaustive list of the Philippines' recommendations has been submitted to the Secretariat for consideration in the Chair summary. In closing, we reiterate that while states and other actors agree to cooperate to suppress smuggling and trafficking in persons and other forms of slavery, the root causes which expose our migrants to such vulnerabilities and danger should also be immediately addressed. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Next is again from Philippines Commission on Human Rights.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good afternoon, everyone. The Commission on Human Rights of the Philippines commends the active participation of government, civil society organizations, and national human rights institutions throughout the process of the GCM in 2017, and we acknowledge each and everyone's meaningful contributions. We encourage the same to continue to forward a human rights-based inclusive framework throughout the development and adoption of the Global Compact in 2018. Trafficking in persons is not only a crime, but is a violation of human rights and is an offense to the dignity and integrity of the human being. A human rights-based approach to countering trafficking in persons must therefore address not only the prosecution of perpetrators engaging in trafficking, but also the needs of the victims. The causes of trafficking are complex and interlinked. The answers, therefore, must address both the obligations of states and the responsibilities of the private actors. Power imbalances resulting from lack of legal status, lack of information, and lack of resources make migrants vulnerable to smugglers and traffickers. Ensuring equal protection for all migrants, irrespective of their status, is therefore essential. Hence, we strongly urge state parties to ensure full independence and adequate resourcing of NHRIs in recognition and support of their mandate and their valuable contribution for the protection and promotion of the rights of migrants and their families. The GCM should take into account the role that NHRIs play with regard to monitoring the implementation of international human rights instruments at the national level and should therefore include NHRIs in the Global Compact as an accountability mechanism. In conclusion, migration and human rights will continue to be a priority issue of states until there are sufficient and sustainable safeguards in place for its protection. As NHRIs, we shall do our part in protecting and promoting the rights of migrants, as well as helping states in the implementation of their obligations by strictly monitoring the state's compliance to international human rights and labor rights instruments. We reaffirm our commitment to work as independent bodies that serve as watchdogs against human rights abuses in accordance with our mandates under the Paris Principles. Further, we emphasize the need for strengthened partnerships and constant dialogue and consultations with governments, civil society organizations, and migrants groups to ensure that efforts will be inclusive and responsive to migrants, their families, and the human rights of all. Thank you.
Thank you very much. May I now request the distinguished representative from the Global Alliance Against Trafficking in Women to take the floor?
Mr. Chair, distinguished delegates, the Global Alliance Against Trafficking in Women thank you for this opportunity to raise 3 points that we hope the Global Compact will address to reduce rights violations against migrants, including trafficking in persons. Before departure, whilst they can support safer migrations, poor quality pre-departure trainings can increase the risk of human rights abuses against migrant workers. For example, GATW has observed training sessions that focus more on pressuring women to be obedient and submissive in the supposed interests of maintaining family and national so-called honor than on imparting useful information about potential risks and abuses. This does not equip women migrants with the knowledge and confidence to report human rights abuses and seek remedy and justice. Secondly, the criminalization of migration and of migrants in irregular status creates a barrier to individuals reporting and seeking assistance for human rights abuses. States need to implement binding firewalls to eliminate migrants' fear that their personal data will be shared with immigration enforcement authorities, leading to arrest, detention, and deportation, denying migrants access to justice, complaint procedures, and social services. Even where states do not criminalize the migrants themselves, many states take an expansive approach to criminalizing the smuggling of migrants, not only criminalizing smugglers, but even criminalizing civil society actors who work to support migrants. This exceeds the international legal requirement and agreed definition of smuggling, which must be for financial or other material benefit. Smuggling of migrants does not in itself constitute a human rights violation. The global thematic consultants have heard grounded research on smuggling of migrants, and we hope that the Global Compact will build on this to ensure a rights and evidence-based response. For example, in this region, UNODC have reported that it seems that assumptions about transnational mafia-style smuggling organizations are not supported by the available literature and data. We hope that the Global Compact will provide an opportunity to build a consensus towards a rights-based approach to anti-smuggling, situating the reality, needs, and rights of migrants at the center. Thank you.
Thank you. Although we have exhausted the list, I get that Japan wants to take the floor. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll be brief. Mr. Chairman, the government of Japan recognizing that human trafficking constitutes a serious violation of human rights and malicious crime, and robustly implement counter-human trafficking measures under the whole government approach. As a state party to the protocol to prevent, suppress, and punish trafficking in persons, Japan is determined to strengthen its cooperation with other parties in preventing human trafficking, protecting victims, and prosecuting perpetrators. In Japan, foreign nationals officially recognized as a human trafficking victim is granted special permission to stay, taking into account consideration each individual situation, even in the case where the victim enter or reside illegally. A human trafficking victim wishing to stay or not being able to stay safely return home to home country is granted work permit as appropriate and where necessary, taking into account individual situation. In addition, the government provides return and repatriation assistance, such as support for return to home country, support for entry to school and vocational training to avoid re-victimization of those foreign victims of human trafficking recognized by the government, including through the its support to IOM. Thank you.
Thank you very much. With this, we have exhausted our list. I don't see anyone interested to take the floor at the stage, so thank you very much for a very informative and interactive sessions. I'm sure, I see. Armenia, you have the floor.
Уважаемый председатель, дамы и господа, я бы хотел вкратце представить опыт Армении в сфере борьбы с трафикингом. Залогом успеха в борьбе с этим явлением в Армении послужило создание в 2007 году Совета по вопросам борьбы с трафикингом, который возглавляет вице-премьер Армении, и в который входят руководители всех заинтересованных в данной области министерств и ведомств. При Совете действует межведомственная рабочая группа, в которой участвуют также представители неправительственных и международных организаций. Осуществление работы данным образом позволяет проводить непосредственное обсуждение всех возникающих вопросов между представителями заинтересованных организаций и выносить их на высокий уровень, на рассмотрение Совета для принятия решений. Результаты, достигнутые за прошедший период, доказывают эффективность функционирования вышеупомянутых структур. На сегодняшний день законодательство Армении практически полностью соответствует требованиям международных нормативно-правовых документов, регулирующих данную сферу. Начиная с 2004 года и по сей день правительственным периодически на 2- либо 3-летний срок утверждается национальная программа борьбы с трафикингом. Интенсивное развитие получила криминализация деяний, связанных с трафикингом. В целях развития и гармонизации уголовного законодательства Армении, принятая в 2003 году, статья, предусматривающая ответственность за торговлю людьми, в последующие годы претерпели ряд изменений и дополнений, последние из которых вступили в силу в 2011 году. В результате были установлены более строгие меры наказания за торговлю людьми. В декабре 2014 года вступил в силу закон об идентификации и помощи лицам, подвергшихся трафикингу и эксплуатации. Указанный документ позволяет наиболее эффективно и целенаправленно предоставлять помощь жертвам трафикинга, а также повышает результативность борьбы с этим преступлением. Всем идентифицированным лицам, подвергавшимся трафикингу, независимо от того, являются они гражданами Армении или нет, при наличии их добровольного согласия предоставляется необходимая помощь, включая юридическую консультацию и защиту в суде, восстановление документов, бесплатное медицинское обслуживание, профориентацию и профподготовку с последующим трудоустройством по возможности, гуманитарную помощь и так далее. При необходимости для граждан Армении проводится работа также с их семьями и общинами с целью последующей успешной реинтеграции жертв трафикинга. Для иностранных граждан по возможности организовывается их безопасная репатриация на родину. Всем жертвам трафикинга предоставляется конфиденциальное безопасное жилье в приютах, функционирующих под ведением неправительственных организаций. Начиная с 2010 года, часть расходов на содержание таких приютов финансируется из государственного бюджета в рамках программы по социально-психологической реабилитации жертв трафикинга. Армения активно сотрудничает как со всеми международными организациями, имеющими мандат в этой сфере, так и со многими государствами региона. Налажено тесное взаимодействие между правоохранительными органами Армении и ряда стран назначения. Уважаемый председатель, результатом всех перечисленных мер явилось то, что в 2012 году Госдепартамент США в своем ежегодном докладе перечислил Армению к первой группе стран, которые прилагают значительные усилия по борьбе с трафикингом, и уже 5-й год подряд мы удерживаем эту позицию. Спасибо за внимание.
Thank you, Armenia. With this, we close the 3C item discussions. We move on to the next agenda item, which is 3D, regional cooperation and governance with regard to migration in all its dimensions, including at borders and during transit, entry, return, readmission, integration, and reintegration. This is the final agenda of today. We would have 4 distinguished panelists with whom we'll have a discussion and then interaction, and hopefully that will throw light on many of the issues that currently we are discussing under the broad issue of compact. May I at this stage request all the distinguished panelists to join us in the chair sofa, rather, in front of the podium, and also I have been given the responsibility by the Secretariat to chair that panel as well. So I'll move into the front seat. Distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, this panel have been entrusted with the responsibility to lead a discussion on governance within the broader recent idea of compact, and specifically looking at the regional cooperation as to how this regional cooperation could help the broader issue of governance of migration, which is extremely difficult, challenging, and very sensitive issue. The reason being that it actually touches one of the most fundamental of statehood, which is sovereignty. Although when sovereignty as a concept evolved back what we often call at 1648, after the Westphalia Agreement in Europe, we have seen that the concept has evolved, brought in more flexibility, keeping in view to resolve some of the cross-cutting intergovernmental issues and also to bring in some relief to people. And we'll see how that spirit could be brought into the issue of governance of migration. In fact, there are already some good practices, examples that our distinguished colleagues will share. We have 4 distinguished panelists. On my extreme right, we have Ms. Doblin Mendoza. She is a senior policy analyst at the Migration Policy Institute. She told me a couple of minutes back that she has moved to Europe, the mainland Europe, for doing still issues related to migration. So she is a former senior policy analyst. And then on my close left is Deepa Sanasuria. Could I pronounce it properly? Okay. Sanasuria, she is the senior assistant secretary of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Sri Lanka. And then on my left we have Ashkar Kesembayev, from head of the Secretariat of the member of the board for economy and financial policy of Eurasian Economic Commission. That's the other regional initiative in that part of the world. And on my left we have William from coordinator of the Migrant Forum in Asia. So we'll listen to him. First, let me start with Doblin. We would like to hear from you as to how ASEAN has moved in terms of entity. I'll let you describe it. And looking at various aspects of interstate relations and how they have dealt with the whole issue of migration. And when we use the word migration, it's certainly international migration that we are using, number one. Number two, we are looking at all aspects of migration, not only regular migration or irregular migration. I think since morning we have been listening so much on the issue of human trafficking. We thought that's what actually the migration is. Migration is much bigger, wider concept than that. But illegal migration is certainly an important element into it. So, over to you.
Thank you, Foreign Secretary Huck, and thank you to the UN Secretariat for inviting me to be a part of this distinguished panel. It is a pleasure and it's a privilege. As Secretary Huck was saying, there are many different types of migration, but I was asked specifically by the Secretariat to focus on one specific aspect of migration, which is related to the mobility of highly skilled people within, specifically in ASEAN. So I'll be focusing my comments on the progress that, as you know, the ASEAN has signed mutual recognition arrangements between 2005 and 2014 that aims to streamline and also to facilitate the mobility and recognition of the professional qualifications within the region. So I will be speaking specifically on that progress. So far, ASEAN member states have signed a mutual recognition arrangement, or MRA, on the tourism sector, and also on 6 regulated occupations. We're talking about engineering, architecture, accountancy, dentistry, medicine, nursing, and currently there's also a framework arrangement on surveying. To be able to answer your question of what has the progress been so far, I think one simple, and I must say maybe overly simple answer is, well, there has been tremendous progress in that area, but there's also tremendously more that needs to be done. I led a team within the Migration Policy Institute and the Asian Development Bank, and we embarked on a year-long consultation involving nearly 400 practitioners that are directly involved in implementing the ASEAN mutual recognition arrangements. And the result of that consultation you could find in 4 reports, over 300 pages in total. But I only have 5 or 6 minutes to speak, so I won't be going into details. But let me just say 2 things here. Number one, there's been progress made, and the progress in the ASEAN has been mainly on 2 fronts. We've seen that there's progress in creating and implementing offices and bodies, regulatory bodies that are important in implementing the ASEAN MRAs. There's also progress in incorporating or transpositioning the MRA principles into national laws. So for instance, the coordinating committees that the MRAs have envisioned to be created is actually functioning. They are meeting 2 to 4 times a year with the assistance of the ASEAN Secretariat. The MRA envisioned the creation of registries of engineers and architects, and that's also functioning, with over 2,000 professionals currently registered in that system, hoping to get qualification at the country of destination. At the national level, ASEAN member states have created or revised 12 offices as a response to the MRAs. We have seen 8 of the 10 countries enacting 29 laws. And after the signing of the MRAs, and these are some revisions of laws, and there's some laws that were enacted just to implement the MRA. So in other words, there's been a lot of development in that area. The MRAs on engineering and architecture have gone the farthest in terms of moving forward and coming up with a working process that ASEAN professionals could actually utilize now if they want to get recognition in another ASEAN country. But I must note, though, that in looking into this further, very few professionals had actually completed the process of recognition. So when we concluded our consultation in 2016, we found that only 7 professionals have actually registered at the country of destination. So in other words, even if there are over 2,000 professionals right now, architects and engineers that wanted to get recognition, a handful are getting recognized at the country of destination. So certainly there is backlog at that end, which leads me to the second point. In saying that despite this tremendous progress, there are still significant technical hurdles that must be overcome. More remains to be done at the ASEAN in terms of creating, revising domestic regulations and processes that are important in making the MRAs consistent and work actually on the ground. So let me just give you an example. We've spoken to professionals and they're saying that they still face hurdles when they seek to practice in another ASEAN country. And these hurdles could be like being required to know the local language, or being required to speak English, or being required to pass the national licensure exams. These are restrictive domestic policies that are not in line with the spirit of the MRAs. And as we've seen, that there is a lot more to be done in dismantling these restrictive policies, because they do not, they limit the ability of the MRAs to facilitate mobility. And the second key challenge that we've seen in this consultation is the issue of building institutional capacity to implement the MRAs. MRAs are very hard to operationalize, and that is not just true within ASEAN, but it's also true in other MRAs in other parts of the world, because we have also looked into this as part of the consultation. There are national regulatory authorities that has not yet existed in some countries. There are some regulatory authorities that exist, but they don't have the resources and the capacity to actually recognize qualifications not even within their own borders, much more those qualifications of people outside their borders. There is an opportunity in supporting these institutions at the national level, and there is an opportunity in fully funding them and supporting them. The costs, however, will be very high. There's much to be gained from MRAs, but we need to invest in this to make it work. And there's a wisdom, we think, in a coordinated approach, especially among donors who are interested in supporting implementation of the MRA. The good news about this is that even though there is maybe a need for more resources, financial or technical, what is not lacking in ASEAN is the commitment among governments to actually make this work. I have been working on migration for a long time now, and I've worked on many different issues, from recruitment to labor migration to diaspora policies, and have never seen interest among governments on this topic more than anything else. When we started the consultation, we were thinking we will be speaking with 100 practitioners. We ended up speaking with 400. We had high-level government officials sitting in for our one-day focus group discussions to have the opportunity to discuss with their counterparts in ASEAN about the real challenges of implementing this. There's a real interest in implementing the MRAs. And I think that we could do more on this. If we think about regional cooperation, which is the topic of this panel, we should be thinking about, well, what are the areas or issues where governments already have some sort of agreement in principle of what they think is important? And I think this is one area where there is an agreement in principle that it is important. And it is, as you may consider, a lowest hanging fruit. And there is an opportunity. There's an opportunity for us to support that, and for the ASEAN experience in particular to be heard much more loudly in Puerto Vallarta in December, and when the negotiations happen next year. I just wanted to point out that the ASEAN experience is very important for two reasons. MRAs are not new. The first MRA was put in 100 years ago. But what is interesting about the ASEAN experience, which I think the rest of the world should know about, is that it is an experiment, it is a project that tries to connect countries that are of different income and backgrounds, which we have never seen in other parts of the world. And therefore, the experience of ASEAN would be very useful in the discussion leading to the Global Compact. Thank you.
Thank you, Doblin. Tremendous progress has been made in the area of migration and mobility within ASEAN, but there are still hurdles. Especially with the high-skilled people. So you're talking with the high-skilled people at the stage. But one good thing is that there's a huge political commitment to make it more easy for talented people to move around, or highly skilled people to move around. But there are institutions still, there are gaps, and more resources and capacity need to be built. These are the broad areas that Doblin has talked about within the ASEAN mobility of highly skilled people governance issue. So we see that some progress has been made, and which could be useful in terms of thinking and drafting what we call as a compact. Let me now move in to South Asia. Within the South Asia, and in fact the Middle East, what we know is now as a Abu Dhabi dialogue, which is basically merger of two independent initiatives, which will taken up, one by the South Asian countries, which is known as Colombo process, basically an entity to deal with origin countries. I was associated with this birth, so I have a huge attachment to this process. Also, subsequently, the destination country, particularly in the Middle East, they decided that they should also have an entity to see how they are dealing with the issue of particularly labor migration. And eventually, the two were kind of brought closer to each other in terms of coordination, and Abu Dhabi process was initiated. That's also more than 5-6 years, if I am not wrong. It has a number of meetings. Sri Lanka is currently chairing that after UAE chairing for a couple of years. So let's hear from us as to what this particular process, less institutional, more formal, more informal body is trying to govern the interstate relation in terms of migration. Over to you.
Thank you for giving this opportunity to Sri Lanka. As a chairing country of ADD, I would like to share recently initiated in Abu Dhabi dialogue. Focusing Global Forum in Mexico, a special meeting on Abu Dhabi dialogue convened in Dubai in July 2017, aimed to facilitate closer cooperation between member states on 4 specific programs. 3 pillars of effective governance guide to design these programs. Those pillars are to ensure the protection of migrant workers. Second one is empowering workers to fulfill their goals and aspirations. Third one is affording workers the opportunity to benefit equitably from the outcomes of temporary labor migration. The initiate programs. First program is an alternate model for labor recruitment. Key objective of this is to promote fair and ethical recruitment among ADD countries. ADD has outlined web-based pilot project on recruitment. Through this, ADD hopes better protection of migrant workers, end fraudulent practices, and reduce role of intermediaries. This helps to reduce the migrant cost also, and it is in line with SDG target 10.7.1. Then the pilot project is with UAE and Philippines already. The second is joint certification and recognition of skills. Members of ADD recognize that skill development certification and recognition of skills will positively impact on welfare of workers, their income earning potential, and overall labor productivity. From the country of origin, investment on training and certification of workers often translates into increased competitiveness of their workforce, in higher wages and increased remittance also. The ADD countries have agreed to facilitate the certification of skills, upskilling, and mutual recognition of skills across the migration cycle. There are 2 routes are available for countries to create greater alignment. First is through the alignment of qualification of standards for target occupations, or second one, by monitoring separate qualifications framework. But need to mutual recognition, the framework through bilateral and multilateral agreement. As an example, UAE offer accreditation certificates for 3 technical training colleges in Sri Lanka for carpentry and masonry in last month. Then the third program is comprehensive information and orientation program. Orientation and information programs are a tool of both protection and empowerment. Objective of ADD is to ensure that labor migrants have a well-founded sense of their rights and responsibilities and are emotionally and psychologically prepared for the changes they encountered. The fourth program is the technology in the governance of labor mobility. Technology creates effective solutions to current challenges, increase transparency in the current process, lowering the recruitment cost, as I said earlier. Colombo Declaration, fourth ministerial consultation on ADD, set out bilateral initiatives in designing a prototype of regional digital labor platform, pilot project with UAE and Philippines also, based on information sharing through electronic platform. Thank you.
Thank you, Deepa, for sharing with us the 3 pillars of the Abu Dhabi dialogue process, with the protection, empowering workers, and benefiting workers from the labor migration. These are the 3 areas. The important aspect is the whole issue of recognition of skill. That continue to be a huge problem in the world of labor mobility. So I'm glad that you have found out a mechanism to at least start addressing it. And also the whole issue of the digital platform. So I'm extremely happy and see that over the years it has made some progress in terms of creating innovative projects. We'll naturally, with the question and answer, we'll come back to you afterwards. Now, may I request Kish Kimbaev, all right? Thank you. Reassuring. To share with us rather the very unique experience of Eurasian Economic Union. I'm told that the European Economic Union, which is 3 countries union, am I correct? At this stage, has taken up some ambitious agenda, including in the area of mobility. So let's hear from him. Over to you.
Dear Chairman, dear delegates, thank you for giving the floor. First of all, on behalf of myself and Eurasian Economic Commission, I would like to express the gratitude for inviting to participate in Asia-Pacific Regional Preparatory Meeting for Global Compact on Safe, Orderly and Regular Migration. I'll speak Russian. Что касается евразийского опыта развития общего рынка труда в рамках нашего интеграционного объединения, то можно с уверенностью сказать, что на евразийском пространстве трудовая миграция является формой реального социального и экономического взаимодействия между государствами-членами и одним из определяющих факторов странового развития. 29 мая 2014 года президенты Казахстана, Беларуси и России подписали договор о создании Евразийского экономического союза, который обозначил переход евразийского интеграционного проекта на более качественный, более глубокий уровень интеграции. Полноправными членами Союза стали Республика Армения с января 2015 года и Кыргызская республика с августа 2015 года. Наш союз создан в целях всесторонней модернизации, кооперации и повышения конкурентоспособности национальных экономик, создания условий для стабильного развития в интересах повышения жизненного уровня населения государств-членов Союза. Сам договор обеспечивает реализацию 4 основных ключевых свобод: свободу передвижения товаров, услуг, капиталов и рабочей силы, трудовых ресурсов. В рамках Союза обеспечивается скоординированная или единая политика в ключевых секторах экономики, которые прямо определены договором о Союзе. В самом договоре нашли отражение конкретные правовые нормы, предоставляющие гражданам Союза всех 5 стран целый ряд преференций, которые недоступны для работников из третьих стран. Это единый рынок труда. Граждане всех 5 стран могут работать на интеграционном пространстве без учета каких-либо ограничений по защите национального рынка труда. Работники практически свободные соискатели на едином рынке труда. Нет квот по привлечению у работодателя, не надо получать разрешительные документы для работников при трудоустройстве. Соответственно, сдавать какие-либо экзамены на знание языка, законодательства, истории, представлять какие-либо медицинские документы или справки. Граждане Союза могут работать в любой из 5 стран не только по трудовому договору, но и на основании гражданско-правового договора, что значительно расширяет возможности их трудоустройства. Обеспечивается взаимное признание документов об образовании по абсолютному большинству специальностей. Это значительно упрощает поиск работы. Срок пребывания определяется сроком заключенного трудового или гражданско-правового договора. Срок пребывания без регистрации увеличен до 30 суток с момента въезда. Очень важны договоренности в части обеспечения равных прав трудящихся на социальное обеспечение, о чем мы говорим все эти 2 дня. Оно реализуется на тех же условиях, в том же порядке и объеме, что и для граждан страны пребывания. Дети трудящихся имеют право на посещение дошкольных учреждений и получение образования в государстве трудоустройства без каких-либо платных услуг. Трудящимся, и не только трудящимся, но и членам их семей, гарантировано право на получение бесплатной медицинской помощи в экстренной и неотложной форме, а также доступ к системе обязательного медицинского страхования в тех странах, где эта система функционирует. Это Кыргызстан, Россия и Казахстан. Очень важным аспектом являются единые правила налогообложения доходов трудящихся с первых дней работы по найму. Поставки предусмотрены для налоговых резидентов страны трудоустройства. Таким образом, имплементация норм договора о Союзе в сфере трудовой миграции способствует более практической реализации создания единого рынка труда в формате Евразийского экономического союза, что подтверждается стат-данными, характеризующими масштабы трудовой миграции. Все стат-данные вы можете найти на сайте Евразийской экономической комиссии. Не буду подробно на них останавливаться. Важным показателем, демонстрирующим уровень трудовой миграции, является соотношение денежных переводов к ВВП страны. Денежные средства, пересылаемые или перевозимые трудящимся на родину, действительно имеют важное значение. На примере 2 стран я могу привести 2 цифры. По Республике Армения это показатель за 2016 год 15% ВВП страны, по Кыргызской республике порядка 30% ВВП страны. Таким образом, можно с уверенностью сказать, что предоставленные договором о Союзе преференции способствуют увеличению взаимных потоков граждан государств-членов, осуществляющих трудовую деятельность на территориях стран, существенному сокращению числа нелегальных трудовых мигрантов. Мы поддерживаем работу, проводимую в рамках разработки глобального договора о безопасной, упорядоченной и легальной миграции. И по нашему мнению, договор данный должен затрагивать все аспекты международной интеграции, а его имплементация способствует защите прав мигрантов, существенному снижению рисков их уязвимости. Считаем чрезмерно важным участие в этом процессе всех заинтересованных сторон. Представителей государственных, неправительственных, международных организаций, представителей гражданского сообщества и самих мигрантов. Учитывая опыт евразийского экономического сотрудничества, по нашему мнению, в глобальном договоре необходимо отразить положение предоставления равных прав и свобод трудовым мигрантам, их допуску к национальным рынкам труда в рамках функционирования интеграционных объединений, которые у нас имеют место быть на нашем пространстве. Потому что обеспечение равных прав трудящимся повышает их, в первую очередь, мобильность, повышает гибкость трудообеспечения экономик государств, участвующих в интеграционных объединениях. Принцип свободы передвижения трудоустройства как раз создает стимулы для мигрантов, и не только для мигрантов, но и для самих работодателей, законным образом, еще раз повторюсь, законным образом оформлять трудовые отношения в соответствии с законом страны пребывания. И таким образом делает трудовую миграцию более упорядоченной, сокращая ее незаконный сегмент. Важным фактором также является решение вопросов, связанных с социальным, медицинским обеспечением трудовых мигрантов и членов их семей. Как бы я уже отметил, договор о Союзе обеспечил доступ трудящихся членов их семей к системам социального обеспечения в стране трудоустройства. Однако в этой области имеются сферы, требующие дальнейшей проработки. Так, например, недостаточная правовая регулированность вопросов пенсионного обеспечения граждан Союза, но сейчас комиссия работает над этим аспектом в плане разработки соответствующего договора о пенсионном обеспечении граждан Евразийского экономического союза. Для формирования рынка труда также недостаточно предоставлять трудящимся право передвигаться и трудоустраиваться, необходимо создать соответствующие условия, в которых именно эти права могут быть реализованы. И в этом плане в рамках Союза предполагается разработать механизм взаимодействия по организованному набору и привлечению трудящихся государств-членов для осуществления их трудовой деятельности в рамках нашей интеграционной пятерки. Реализация именно этого проекта будет способствовать созданию соответствующих условий для максимально эффективного использования объединенного трудового потенциала государств-членов ЕС, формированию системы именно организованного привлечения рабочей силы. Сделать этот процесс более упорядоченным, регламентированным. Кроме того, комиссия ведется работа над проектом соглашения о порядке въезда, выезда, следования транзитом граждан Евразийского экономического союза, целью которой является именно процедурное упрощение взаимных поездок граждан Союза. Пересечение по внутренним документам, по одному из документов. Это очень важно для детей, для студентов, учащихся, для трудовых мигрантов. Ожидаем, что принятие подобного соглашения существенно повысит мобильность государств, мобильность трудящихся государств, членов ЕС. Еще один аспект, на который хотелось бы обратить внимание, это межгосударственное информационное взаимодействие в сфере трудовой миграции, основанное именно на международных стандартах. В этом плане комиссия ведет работу по формированию и реализации цифровой повестки Евразийского экономического союза, где имеют место также предложения по информационному взаимодействию с использованием соответствующих информационных систем трудовой миграции. Не буду более подробно останавливаться на этом. Вся информация также доступна на нашем сайте. Вкратце отмечу, что информационные технологии в системе управления трудовой миграцией являются перспективными не только для нашего региона, но и в плане, я думаю, международной повестки. И позволят сделать миграционные потоки более прозрачными, более управляемыми, а также снизить финансовые риски трудящихся мигрантов, обеспечит им более комфортный доступ к услугам при найме на работу в государстве трудоустройства. В заключение хотелось бы отметить, что опыт Евразийского экономического союза по обеспечению цивилизованного доступа трудящихся мигрантов из стран нашего региона на рынке труда государств-членов Союза, в том числе через подготовку и принятие юридических значимых документов и инструментов, способствующих созданию основ взаимовыгодного сотрудничества в области трудовой миграции, формированию механизмов общего рынка труда, могут быть востребованы различными акторами на региональном уровне при усилии по регулированию миграционных процессов. Спасибо.
Thank you very much, Ashka, for sharing with us as to how the Eurasian Economic Union has formed one single labor market within the broader one economic space. And I'm extremely encouraged to see that the laborers from these member states are given quite a bit of services and rights, including children to be educated in the member states institutions, and also the healthcare. So thank you very much. I'm sure there will be questions, and we'll quickly move into that. With this, may I request William to share with us as to how they would like to see some of the governance issues, cooperation issues so that we can then open the floor for more wider discussions. Over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Let me begin by saying that I think what has been established, and there is no doubt about it anymore in that sense, is that it has been established that civil society has a very vital role to play, and that is without question. And I think more and more we are seeing the appreciation of private sector as well in the discussions around migration. And I think this is one of the, over the years through other processes, even like the GFMD, and in this process leading up to the consultation process for this global compact, I think this has already been established. I think what we are not discussing at the moment, and I'm not sure why, we might be shy of discussing it, we might not be ready to discuss it, or we might not know at the moment, it's not very clear, is what the governance of the compact itself is going to be. And I think for us as civil society that is important in the sense of that even if you look at the regional cooperation processes at the regional level, they have had their preparatory process and they have contributed to the compact. But we might have a situation where if we don't start talking about the governance structure, the infrastructure of the compact already, we might have just different processes following at the regional, international level and things like that, and civil society is struggling to continue to keep pace with this. And we need to break away from that kind of a model. What we need to be able to look at is, and I think this is where the value will be, is because civil society and this, again, the compact has recognized this. I've heard governments often say frontline, first respondents, full spectrum approach from country of origin to country of destination and even return in terms of services that civil society is able to provide. So all this can come together if we are able to, again, if we are able to look at what would be that governance structure. Then you would have the RCPs, the regional consultative processes or regional processes as well, aligning to that in some way, being able to contribute further to that. And I think we'll see actually a fast tracking of some of the objective and results in this. So for me, from a civil society perspective, I think we need to start talking about what connects these different satellites that are there. What would be the framework under which this connects, and how does then civil society, because there is no question of the role that civil society can play. But I think for civil society now to be able to see that what is the next, how do we prepare next for what is to come, and that is in the governance. And that discussion has not yet started. I hope, and we are coming up to the stock taking, I hope by the time we come to Mexico, there'll be at least a little more clarity on this. But it's a conversation that should have started. I know there are several governments. You yourself have pointed out in several meetings. You have talked about the possible governance structure of what it could look like. We've heard the Philippines as a government talk about a people-centered, migrant-centered approach, actionable. We need to start putting together that infrastructure and then look at how different stakeholders play a role in that. Civil society plays a role both in terms of design, can be part of designing processes, civil society can be part of implementing, and civil society can be part of consultation. Yeah? So that if we can, again, look at, and maybe in terms of governance, what might happen and what could possibly happen once we have this infrastructure of the compact in place. I think the regional consultative cooperation processes will then have to be reviewed. And they will have to be reviewed from a multi-stakeholder lens. Right now in our region, at least from the 5 processes that kind of exist, Colombo, Abu Dhabi Dialogue, Bali, ASEAN, and SAARC, right now, civil society is there and not there, kind of thing. Nothing has been fully institutionalized. The compact might be able to move further some of the discussions on how civil society can be integral to some of those, to the consultation processes. And that is what we should be looking at. So maybe at this stage already, as we begin to start talking about governance, it might be also good to start a discussion in the regional processes as to how can the participation of civil society be further instituted or institutionalized in the, so that the deliverables on this will be more visible and effective.
Good. Thank you, William. William tried to sort of share with us that the civil society will play a very important role both in the designing process, drafting process, negotiating process, and implementation process of the compact. One. The other one is that like many of us, the civil society is still grappling as to how the new creature will look like. What will be the architecture of the compact in terms of governance? I think that something should be also asking our SRSG and our office as to what is their initial thinking based on the consultations that we are currently having. And once we have a little bit of an idea, then we can see how the processes, the entities would feed into that, the existing one, and whether we need to create some more processes and entities. Am I correct in reflecting your thoughts? I'll open the floor. Just give me a minute. You know, as a chair, sometimes I can forget that I'm a permanent secretary of a state. So and share my wild, weird ideas. Recently, I'm reading a very interesting book as to what will happen to the state in 30, 35, 50, or say 100 years' time. It will certainly not be the same in terms of its sovereign rights and control and mechanism. It will evolve. And in that changed scenario, it is likely that individuals or individual composed bodies, NGOs, not composed in the sense of composition, would have much more role or equal role as that of a state that we see in terms of the government and the cabinet and the rest of it. And in that circumstances, things would certainly be different in terms of mobility. The other area where is also very weird thinking going on in the whole issue of how the work will be in and mobility would be in the changed fourth industrial era. So all these are still very uncertain, very vague, but that also provokes us to think and think ahead so that we don't again create a crisis centering around mobility. With this, some funny and weird ideas, let me open the floor for asking questions to our distinguished panelists. If you could be very brief and precise and direct the questions to the panelists, that will help us in responding to you. If there are questions, we'll take initially 3 questions and come back once again. I think it's quite, wow. Yes, please. Let's see. I think the hand went up there early. Yes, you have the floor, sir. And then I'll come back to you.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. My name is Mega. I'm from ASEAN Secretariat. It's a pleasure to be here as part of this meeting and to hear the views around the table. We truly observe the progress on these regional consultations regarding Global Compact. And I wish to highlight that the ASEAN cooperation to address issues concerning migration have been continuing for the longest time in various areas, trafficking, addressing the rights of migrant workers, disaster management and emergency response, climate change impact and mitigation, gender responsiveness, the rights of children, and other aspects. And I think government of Philippines and Indonesia in different sessions have highlighted how this is the exciting time for ASEAN, where we have legally binding ASEAN conventions against trafficking, and to be signed ASEAN consensus on the protection and promotion the rights of migrant workers, where these two documents make reference to one another. And for several times, law enforcement, labor ministry, ministry in charge of gender, social welfare, and also law have met many times to address multi-stakeholder concerns, to address issues of trafficking, and there is multi-stakeholder work plan about to be adopted. So in addressing all these issues, we have been collaborating with different UN agencies for the longest time. There is ASEAN-UN Strategic Partnership, and we are now finalizing the complementarity report on SDGs and the achievement of ASEAN Vision 2025. So the final point that I wish to highlight is that it's yet clear to us on how Global Compact would add value to the already wonderful collaboration and various efforts being done by ASEAN member states at regional level and together with UN agencies in addressing these issues, including, in fact, on skills recognition of workers at Tibet level who are mostly vulnerable. Those workers covered by MRAs, they are professionals. They are quite independent in taking care of themselves. So this is our observation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. This is, I'm Ruben Torres. I represent the ASEAN Trade Union Council in this meeting. The ASEAN Trade Union Council is composed of 18 labor centers in the 10 or 9 ASEAN countries. And in the discussions today and yesterday, there had been no reference to the role of organized workers, trade unions, in defining the Global Compact and in implementation of agreements and decisions made through the process.
Thank you.
We have been contributing in this migration effort because we have put up, we have an agreement with the South Asia Regional Trade Union Council and the Arab Trade Union Council. In fact, we have put up in many countries now the migrant resource centers, which actually provide legal counseling, legal assistance, and medical assistance to distressed workers. Recently, last month, we organized the migrant resource centers in Jordan to service Asian, South Asian, and East Asian workers, especially focusing as a pilot project to the most vulnerable sectors.
Thank you, sir.
Helpers. So we wish to be engaged.
We got your question.
We
what
wish
is
to
the
be
role
engaged.
of trade union within?
I'm just making this statement. We wish to be engaged in this process, and certainly we can be of help in implementing any decision on migration of labor. Thank you.
Thank you. Could I instruct Bangladesh delegate to be as precise as possible? Otherwise, I'll cut you.
Thank you very much, sir. I have a question for William. William, you have rightly mentioned that there has not been much discussion except for what sir, the moderator, mentioned in a couple of areas, the Bangladesh Foreign Secretary, about the governance structure of the outcome of the Global Compact and migration. In particular, yesterday's side event, he mentioned 3 areas. One, the process, the thematic substance, and also the outcome of the governance structure of the Global Compact as well. I have one question for you. We would like to know about the view of the civil society, about the governance structures, relation, and monitoring would be a strong word, but maybe a custodian. How would you like to see that, and what would you like to see that? And also this Global Compact's relation with GFMD and UN. Thank you.
Thank you. William, that's for you. Thailand.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to ask a question for the third panelist, and maybe other panelists could also clarify as well. Regarding to the statement that you have mentioned, how can states ensure security while facilitating the exit and entry at the border to promote economic activities? We do have an example on border management which will be elaborated in our national statement later. Thank you.
I'm told by the Secretariat that we are not in a position to take any more questions unless somebody has a burning questions, wants to burn on the whole building. We will not take questions, and because we have 5 statements from the delegates to make, so we'll have to go back to the main plenary. But quickly, we would give some opportunity for the panelists to make a quick remark. Dovlin.
Well, I think that I just wanted to second the Assistant Secretariat's concern about the fact that there is little progress in terms of mutual recognition when it comes to the Tibet, which is more of the low skilled sector, and that is where a lot of the problem is. And if I might indulge a bit about your chair, about your weird idea of the role of the state, I think what we've seen in the work on MRA is how much all of this has been pushed by professional organizations actually trying to do their own thing and trying to recognize each other across borders, and how could the state work with them to initiate change on the ground. So there really is something going on there. Thank you.
Good. Thank you. William?
Yeah, just very quickly then on monitoring, I think civil society has a lot of experience on monitoring, and this civil society has demonstrated over different international bodies. You have civil societies used to coming up with shadow reports, with its own independent reports, with indexes that follow government commitments. So there is a lot of wealth in monitoring of civil society, and civil society is looking for what would be the mechanism that we will report to that is monitoring. So we need something like that, because that is what we are asking for. Secondly, in terms of what we are looking at is in terms of the GFMD, which was explicitly asked, I think we have asked already in a statement that has been put out by international civil society, is that the GFMD would have to start a different life, would have to upgrade to a different version now, which could be a little more, if it follows the compact, a lot more, the possibility of more commitments that are made and that are monitored. So it could have that role of monitoring some of this. On the role of the SRSG as well, we have raised question as to what would be the mandate and role of the SRSG in the post-compact world after adoption, and how will that be spelled out? But these are questions that we are asking, and we would like to see member states responding to that or thinking out loud. And this is where the transparency and accountability becomes important. You don't have something cooked and then presented. Let's talk. Let's deliberate together.
Thank you. Thank you. Ashka.
Третий вопрос был адресован был мне и звучал как безопасность. Как обеспечить одновременно безопасность и содействовать в то же время мобильности трудовых мигрантов. Я думаю, тут есть несколько путей, как совместить и безопасность, и содействовать одновременно мобильности в плане создания соответствующей нормативно-правовой базы. Вывести из тени в легальный сектор трудовую миграцию, чтобы нормативно-правовая база позволяла делать это максимально эффективно, и мигранты сами были заинтересованы в соблюдении именно законодательства страны пребывания, когда едут работать в рамках нашего интеграционного объединения в странах. Этот опыт также может быть полезен в рамках разработки глобального договора. Мобильность – это создание, прежде всего, соответствующих инструментов, которые позволяют мигранту свободно находить место работы, свободно осуществлять денежные переводы, работать, одновременно обладая соответствующими гарантиями безопасности, социального страхования, медицинские гарантии и так далее. Вот эти механизмы мы разрабатываем и погрузили в тело договора. Дальнейшую нормативную правовую базу мы также будем разрабатывать. Это процесс не такой «я сделал и все». он имеет большие перспективы, и вопросы тут совершенствовать нашу нормативную правовую базу имеет место быть. Наш опыт, я считаю, также может быть полезен при разработке соответствующего договора, и какие-либо рекомендации, если они найдут отражение в договоре, мы также имплементируем нашу нормативную правовую базу Союза. Спасибо.
Thank you very much. My apology that we cannot take any more questions, but let me just make a quick remark as in terms of a continuous conclusion. But the role of the trade union, I think trade union has already placed its card quite nicely within the compact discussions that I have attended so far. But trade union has also to go through a fundamental and a radical change in view of the changing world. They cannot expect it to play the traditional role that they are used to playing. The issue of governance continue to within the compact will be the most debated, discussed and hardly negotiated concept because it has three aspects, at least to my perception. One is the whole issue of policy, legal aspects and the forms and the practices. The other is the institution, is do we have an institution within the state or globally available which can help implementing the compact, like the refugee compact. And then third one is do we have the resources and capacity to do that, or shall we lay out things which will not be implemented? One of the thought is that why not we institutionally link it with goal 17, which is the broader cooperation goal that we have put in. If we have brought in trade issues and other dispute settlement issues in the goal 17, why can't we bring the compact of migration also in the goal 17? We are thinking of it and then link it with three goals. Goal 10, inequality goal. The goal 16, which is the governance goal, broader governance goal, and the third one is then bring in the goal 17 and see whether these three goals could create a cluster within which we can place the compact. Just a thought. Thank you very much. I'm told that the interpretation would be available till 5, so we'll try and wrap up this session by 5. If not, then we'll have to go without interpretation for another 5 minutes, and then the light will go off. So may I request the distinguished delegate from Philippines to take the floor?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll try to be brief. Given the cross-border nature of migration, cooperation between the states is imperative. Cooperation is especially important during crisis situations and in view of rising anti-migrant and xenophobic sentiments. Moreover, the principle of shared responsibility implies a need for countries of origin, transit, and destination to cooperate. As we have heard throughout the discussions yesterday and today, a number of migrant-related challenges, including border management, skills recognition, portability of benefits, trafficking, and smuggling, can only be adequately addressed through cooperation. Mr. Chair, indeed, a number of initiatives at the global and regional level are motivated by the need to cooperate on such issues, and the Philippines has been active in many of them. I will not elaborate anymore on the various initiatives and the role that the Philippines has played, because this has been already discussed by my colleagues previously and the resource persons, whether with respect to migrants in countries in crisis, whether with respect to the Colombo process, the Abu Dhabi dialogue, the Bali process, and especially within ASEAN. Let me just focus, Mr. Chair, on the non-exhaustive list of recommendations that the Philippines wishes to submit for consideration. We believe, Mr. Chair, that we need a GCM or compact that will, number one, strengthen our partnership with the private sector, with respect to ethical recruitment, including the adoption of employer pays principle, among others. Special attention should be paid to women workers, domestic workers, and those in vulnerable work conditions. Number two, a compact that will set minimum standards in terms of regulations and employment conditions for migrant workers. Number three, a compact that will allow us to work together to strengthen the pre-departure and post-arrival process to better prepare migrant workers for integration at work and in the community. Number four, compact that will strengthen cooperation in crisis management and crisis preparedness, including repatriation. Number five, a compact that will develop mechanisms to extend social protection systems to migrant workers and allow for portability of earned benefits. Number six, a compact that will reduce remittance costs, including by promoting an enabling environment for cost-effective remittance transfer methods and reducing cumbersome regulations that cause de-risking. Number seven, a compact that will promote multi-stakeholder engagement at the national, regional, and global levels. Lastly, Mr. Chair, we need a compact that will enable us to work more closely together to strengthen data collection and data sharing to ensure migration policies are based on evidence rather than on emotions. In closing, and with respect to the question of governance that was raised earlier, we don't have a full answer, but we do believe that existing regional mechanisms, particularly existing intergovernmental regional mechanisms, can play a crucial facilitative role in the implementation and review of agreed commitments in the Global Compact on Migration. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. At this stage, I would like to give the floor to the Islamic Republic of Iran, and I'm told that they would be making a country statement. Could you be kindly little brief?
Thank you. In the name of Allah, the Beneficent, the Merciful, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, the development of the developing countries inbounded to mobilizing the international financial resource for investing in the mentioned states. Well, it is worthy to be noted that there is scientific on the capacity building facilitation of knowledge, information, and technology interchange among the developed and the developing countries. Developed countries and governmental know how technology tycoons are asked to collaborate in having the needs grants for investment and facilitate transfer of knowledge to developing countries for the purpose of inbound progress, increased and development, which will lead to reduction in migration demand and migrate smuggling. Another working step would be facilitating the legal and regular visa issuance as well as work permits for the migrants organized from the developing countries. It is a fundamental measure to extirpate the illegal migrations and migrant smuggling. Islamic Republic of the Iran because of its geopolitical location is a country of destination for both 3 million of foreign refugees and expatriates, as well as a country of transition for millions of migrants from east to west and vice versa. So the evolution of the trans and international community approach to the refugee and migration issue is very important for my esteemed country. Excellencies, Islamic Republic of Iran policy towards the international migrations is based on the balanced and orderly encounter with the migration phenomenon with the focus on the regulating the migration policies and concentrating on the elimination of the causal routes of unbalanced development within the developing countries.
Excellency, we have a huge difficulty with time, and I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 delegates. So if you could quickly end your statement. And you can give that to the Secretariat and we can take note of it.
Yes.
Thank you.
Regarding of being the host to huge mass of refuge for decades from on hand and the burden of these political, economical, social and security related obligations from the other Islamic Republic of Iran recognized no new commitment regarding migration and its any related issues. Thank you.
Thank you. May I now request Nauru to make the statement?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator, for this opportunity to share with this august forum some observation made thus far. I also take this opportunity to thank the UN ESCAP for extending the invitation to Nauru to attend this important meeting. Distinguished delegates, as a member of the Pacific region, Nauru and our other Pacific brothers and sisters know all too well the importance of regional cooperation and an inclusive and consultative governance system with regards to migration. As the Asia-Pacific region, we share the universal migration issues that we have heard through discussions. However, there remains the requirement for further insight into more specific areas of concern. As Pacific Islanders, climate change is only one major facet of the migration discussion, and as diverse as every region is, the Pacific is no exception. Nauru would like to contribute to this discussion by ensuring that going forward, matters of cooperation and governance is consultative and focused on not only durable solutions, but sustainable solutions. Sustainability is is a vital element of any arrangement. Not only must solutions endure, they must add value to the lives of the affected individuals and the community in which they are being implemented for it to be successful. And this can only be done through an inclusive and consultative process. If we are tasked with the important responsibility of bettering the experience of migrants, refugees, or asylum seekers, we must open ourselves to hear their story, to know their concerns, and to acknowledge their experience in decisions we make. We cannot only take to matters of economic development, we must avail ourselves to other perspectives of those who have a different experience in this space. Without their contribution, the final outcome will not be holistic. For example, Nauru, with a population of approximately 9,000, has processed, protected, and settled over 900 refugees and over 140 asylum seekers from over 20 countries in the world. Nauru, as a temporary settlement country, continues to look for pathways with the global community for resettlement options, with Nauru even exploring alternative resettlement solutions through a labor-based resettlement platform. Through our participation in the Bali process, we have raised these efforts to both governmental and non-governmental agencies. It is clear that particularly for the Pacific region, there is a request for more information about the issues that affect us along the lines of immigration. Mr. Moderator, these questions represent the foundation for an opportunity for more targeted consultative efforts and Pacific-centric support so as to ensure that the Pacific is not left behind in the overall objective of this program. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Afghanistan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. Let me, at the outset, thank the ESCAP for inviting our government to this important meeting in this beautiful city of Bangkok. We also thank the government of Thailand for its hospitality. Ladies and gentlemen, migration has been a significant and top policy priority of our government. We have more than 5 million migrants and refugees all over the world. For this important, we have established mechanisms and frameworks to tackle this issue on different levels. Our government's policy is based on return migration. However, we need more support of international partners in terms of voluntary repatriation and return. Unfortunately, migration has been perceived as a negative phenomenon beside migrants' contribution to economic development of both countries of origin and destination. It's therefore important to establish measures to turn migration from negative to positive phenomenon. Probably the best way is to promote safe, orderly, and regular migration, which we really appreciate and support. It is also important to assess the drivers of migration, especially irregular migration. In case of my country, people migrate because of insecurity, economic problems, such as lack of job opportunities, and so on. But the biggest of all is so-called brain drain. Our people are hopeless, and they wish to leave the country to find a better life. However, they lack sufficient awareness about the risks of irregular migration and thus migrate. They don't know that they might, what they might face. Holding awareness campaigns in my country can resolve this problem. Therefore, we need our partners' support in this regard. I believe that the biggest problem of migration is irregular migration. We should establish comprehensive policies and guidelines and make practical steps towards solving this problem. We can decrease irregular migration either by promoting regular migration or effective border management. My country needs international community support in both ways. Irregular migration is dangerous and costly for migrants. Because of their irregular status of migration, migrants can be easily exploited by traffickers and smugglers. Being irregular migration is the biggest vulnerability of migrants. Another problem in migration is lack of social inclusion and alienation of migrants. It is significant to promote social inclusion in the host countries. Migrants can be both an opportunity or a challenge. If they are well integrated, they will contribute to our economic growth. If not integrated, they will be alienated and even can be easily recruited by extremists and will be a threat to the host countries. Moreover, we should support the human rights of migrants and refugees all over the world, regardless of their status, especially the most vulnerable, such as children, women, and disabled. Discrimination, xenophobia, racism, and lack of social inclusion should be tackled. In terms of return migration, we need more support of our partners in both return and reintegration. To encourage migrants to return, we should provide them basic assistance such as accommodation, food, and training to start a new life, which is only possible through support of international community. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Armenia, please.
Спасибо, господин председатель. Я бы хотел привлечь ваше внимание к вопросу оказания помощи странам и регионам, чьи приоритеты созвучны с повесткой на 2030 год, а также находящихся в процессе обсуждения глобальным договором, но которые не имеют достаточных ресурсов для должного осуществления данных приоритетов. Рассмотрев данный вопрос, я бы хотел в контексте насущного для моей страны вопроса перемещения беженцев из Сирии в Армению. Кризис в Сирии в числе других стран региона оказал значительное влияние и на нашу страну. Армения, не имея общих границ с Сирией, с начала конфликта в Сирии с марта 2011 года приняла около 22 тысяч сирийских беженцев, подавляющее большинство из которых этнические армяне, и тем самым, согласно данным журнала The Economist, Армения в числе первых 3 стран в Европе по числу принятых из Сирии беженцев в пересчете на душу населения. Следует отметить, что с момента начала конфликта Армения оказывала посильную помощь лицам, перемещенным из Сирии. Это нашло отражение в различных сферах государственной деятельности, начиная с принятия нормативных актов, содействующих быстрому и благоприятному решению различных проблем сирийских беженцев, и заканчивая осуществлением совместных с УВКБ ООН и различными панармянскими благотворительными фондами конкретных программ, таких как предоставление микрокредитов, субсидий для аренды жилья, а также решение отличных социально-бытовых программ. Принимая во внимание историческую, этническую, языковую и культурную идентичность беженцев из Сирии с коренным населением Армении, для них интеграция в Армении могла бы стать наилучшим долгосрочным решением. Тем не менее, тревожным является тот факт, что из-за ограниченных ресурсов нашего государства часть лиц, перемещенных из Сирии, покидает Армению. Согласно исследованиям, некоторая часть лиц возвратилась в Сирию, в большинстве случаев оставив семьи в Армении. Есть также лица, которые уехали или просить убежище в европейских странах, или же искать работу в странах Персидского залива или в России. Поэтому, с нашей точки зрения, необходимо, чтобы в глобальном договоре получил отражение вопрос предоставления финансовой помощи странам, которые не находятся в непосредственной близости со странами, где разворачиваются конфликтные ситуации, как в случае Армении и Сирии, тем не менее подвергаются значительному воздействию миграционных потоков и не располагают необходимыми ресурсами и возможностями для их должного регулирования. Данный подход соответствует тем рекомендациям, которые были предоставлены в докладе специального представителя Генерального секретаря по вопросам миграции господина Питера Сазерленда на 71-й сессии Генеральной Ассамблеи ООН от 3 февраля 2017 года. В частности, 11-я рекомендация доклада гласит, что необходимо, чтобы государства не только проводили надлежащую внутреннюю миграционную политику, но и вкладывали средства в те государства и регионы, которые верно определили свои миграционные приоритеты, но не располагают необходимыми ресурсами и возможностями для их реализации. Благодарю за внимание.
Thank you. Thailand, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, Thailand has long experienced economic, political, and social dynamics of migration, which have caused problems of migrant laborers who are taken advantage and fall into victim of human trafficking or insufficient humanitarian assistance and facilitation for illegal migrants. Since the national authorities tend to fail to address all groups of migrants effectively, Thailand recognized the need to address illegal migrants and activities and manage border control in an effective way, so that solution and coordinated measures among agencies and countries concerned could be taken. In this regard, Thailand fully supports enhanced regional connectivity, both within ASEAN and with other regions. One example of the regional cooperation on border control that could be highlighted is the high-level regional conference on enhancing cooperation on border management in the ASEAN region, ensuring a more interconnected, safe, and secure ASEAN community, co-hosted by Thailand and the UNODC on May 2nd this year in Bangkok. The meeting has exchanged views and best practices on developing ASEAN connectivity and linkages between ASEAN and beyond, measures in addressing trans-border challenges and non-traditional challenges such as illicit drugs and precursor trafficking, trafficking in persons, people smuggling, and tourism. The meeting also emphasized that border management could reinforce development of greater connectivity and linkages within ASEAN and between regions. Safety along the border will not only enable people to benefit from the positive implication of physical and software connectivity, but also prevent negative impact of the illegal movement of people and illicit drug smuggling and other related crimes. To this end, Thailand will continue our cooperation not only with the neighboring countries, but also with other actors such as the academia, civil society organizations, and international organizations for better regional cooperation and governance for the sustainable benefits of all states concerned and their peoples at large. Thank you.
Thank you. Task Force on ASEAN Migrant Workers.
Thank you. The ASEAN Forum on Migrant Labor is a positive development, and that should be considered as a good practice. And beside that, the ASEAN Forum is a tripartite plus civil society organization, and as such, it brings together key stakeholders, including the ASEAN Secretariat, the ASEAN Committee on Migrant Workers, ILO, IOM, UN Women, and the Task Force. It is an annual gathering that comes together to discuss, share experiences, build consensus on the protection of migrant workers based on the ASEAN Declaration. And why do I say these things? Because in reality, there are 15 civil society representatives who attend the ASEAN Forum on Migrant Labor. In the last ASEAN Forum, that's the 10th forum, the topic was about achieving decent work for domestic work in Manila last October. And in fact, ASEAN came to a consensus that they will recognize domestic work as work and move forward. This is a very important historical recognition in the 10 countries of ASEAN. And I think this should be something that we can look forward to, that while ASEAN Task Force itself, Task Force on ASEAN Migrant Workers, think it's very critical to cooperate, develop the cooperation among the governments, but it's also involving the trade unions, employers, and the civil society. No single state or government can solve the problems that we have talked about today. And as such, I will say that this experience could be taken as a good practice and a way to move forward, even in the GCM practices in future. As we talked about, governance is going to be a serious issue. Maybe we can learn a lesson from each other. Because it's important that we have effective implementation, monitoring, and review. To do that, I think all the tripartite partners and the civil society need to be involved. Thank you.
Thank you very much. With this, we come to the end of these sessions. I'm sure the the statements that were made will try and reflect it in the chair's report, if not full but part. Tomorrow in the morning there will be some interesting side events, but the session will resume at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, which will consider chair's summary. I think with this we adjourn the sessions, but there are certain announcement that the Secretariat will make afterwards.
Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, we would like to invite you to join one of the several parallel side events and special events that will take place tomorrow prior to the commencement of the formal segment of this meeting. We have uploaded flyers and other relevant information to the meeting website and encourage you to seek more information and details from there. Firstly, we wish to bring your attention to the special event hosted by ESCAP entitled Migration and Sustainable Development in North and Central Asia. This special event will take place in Meeting Room G from 10 to 12 tomorrow. Secondly, 2 side events will run tomorrow morning. The first 2 of them in parallel from 9 a.m. to 10 a.m. These are a side event hosted by Save the Children, UNICEF, and the International Detention Coalition, entitled Migrant Children in Asia, How to Address Their Needs and Uphold Their Rights. This side event will take place in Meeting Room E. The second side event from 9 to 10 is a side event hosted by the Asia Pacific Forum on Women, Law and Development, the Asia Pacific Mission for Migrants, and the International Migrants Alliance, entitled The Global Compact for Migration and the International Human Rights Protection System, Addressing the Root Causes of Migration. This side event will take place in Meeting Room G. Following these 2 side events, from 10 a.m. to 11 a.m., there is a side event hosted by the governments of Bahrain, the governments of the Philippines, Migrant Forum in Asia, and the International Organization for Migration, entitled Addressing Irregular Labor Migration in the GCC. This event will take place in Meeting Room E. And lastly, from 11:30 to 12:30, there will be a side event hosted by the Asia Pacific Refugee Rights Network and UN Women. This side event is entitled Exploring the Nexus Between the 2 Global Compacts from a Gender-Responsive Perspective. And this side event will take place in Meeting Room E as well. At 1 p.m., there will be a hospitality lunch hosted by IOM and ESCAP in the reception hall on the ground floor. You are kindly requested tomorrow to return to this conference room by 1400 hours to commence item 4 of the agenda of this meeting. We wish you a pleasant evening and look forward to your engagement at the special events and side events tomorrow morning. Thank you.